Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching first part of What If Naruto Was Found by Erwin after Danzo's betrayal. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no time. Let's start the story.
There it was, the ravine. It was a massive trench, like a deep, knife blade cut, scarring the landscape for kilometers in two directions. It was still in the far distance. The only reason that they could see it was because they were on top of a hill resting their horses on an overlook that provided a view of the land. There was, faintly seen, a long smudge of gray along the horizon. It was about 20 kilometers to the ravine, and another 80 kilometers before they would reach Wall Maria. Massive titans could be seen dotting the landscape in the area between the group of riders and the ravine. They were traveling at around 15 kilometers an hour right now, intent on having their horses cover distance rather than going quickly. They would gallop only if they were being pursued. Naruto was thankful for this overlook of the land, as it provided him with a rough idea of where to send his clones. The stretch between where they were and the ravine was completely flat, and should the group be unable to avoid a titan, they would most likely lose quite a few men. And even with Naruto there, his inability to sense the titans would give little help in forewarning. Naruto rode to the front of the group of resting riders and their horses, intent on speaking with Hideki about his plan on killing at least a few titans. While Naruto could do this on his own, he was still acting as a cell sword to Erwin, and would thus have to take orders from the command. He probably would gain some rank once he spoke with this Southern General Pixis, but for right now he would play it safe and consult Hideki. Naruto found Hideki sitting on a stone, looking over the land, and resting his leg. "Hideki-san," said Naruto, alerting Hideki to his presence. Hideki sighed before looking at Naruto. He had been surveying the land, and felt grim. He counted more than the usual amount of titans today. "Yes, Naruto-san. What is it?" replied Hideki. "I might have a way to take out a few titans before we have to encounter them," said Naruto, stressing the might, because while he was nearly positive that he, or rather his clones, could do it, he would rather not make any promises that he couldn't keep. Hideki, on the other hand, was incredibly surprised. "If you have a way, please tell me," said Hideki, hopefully. "Well, as you have probably guessed, I am different than everyone here," said Naruto. "Not really, other than being dressed oddly, appearing in an explosion coming out of bloody nowhere, having an accent, and being able to summon anything you want from those sleeves of yours. I'd say you were pretty normal," replied Hideki, unable to keep the sarcasm out of his voice. "Anyway, one of these differences would be the ability to wield chakra, which allows me to do many otherwise impossible things. Amongst some of the things I can do, is this," said Naruto, his hands placing themselves in a cross position. Naruto muttered something under his breath, and before Hideki knew it, 3 clones of Naruto puffed into existence. Hideki's eyes went wide in surprise. Many of the people who had been watching them converse were also extremely surprised to see the clones pop into existence. "You may recognize this ability from our second meeting," continued Naruto. He rested his hands by his side. Hideki did remember the clone that had been in the bed, the one that had disappeared after Naruto had gotten him at knife point. "These are called Kage Bunshin, shadow clones. In the normal tongue, this means shadow clones. What it basically does is creates tangible duplicates of myself," said Naruto. One of his clones walked forward and held out its hand to help Hideki up off the rock he was sitting on. "But how is this possible? You say that you use this chakra, but what is chakra?" inquired Hideki, awed and confused by this power. "Chakra is, to put it simply, a combination of spiritual and physical energy. Without it no one would be alive. Everything has chakra, from the air you breathe, to the earth you stand on. Even the titans have chakra, but for some reason, the chakra titans have is completely disproportionate to their mass. You have much more chakra than any titan we have come upon thus far," replied Naruto, a frown upon his face as he spoke about the last part. "This is why I say might, because as of right now, they have no more chakra than, let's say, a large rabbit, and they are very hard to detect," he continued, turning away from Hideki and looking over the plains to the ravine. "How many of these Kage Bunshin can you create at one time, Naruto-san?" queried Hideki. Naruto turned to look at Hideki. "As of right now, three very powerful, very effective Kage Bunshin," replied Naruto. Hideki visibly deflated. No matter how powerful someone was, 3 people are only 3 people. "Well, Naruto-san, unless these clones can pull off miracles, I don't think they'll be of much help," said Hideki, looking glum once again. "Hideki-san, while I cannot promise anything, I can almost guarantee at least a few kills, or if nothing else, a small meat shield," replied Naruto. Hideki was about to speak when Naruto went rigid and froze in place. "Ah, come on kid, have some more confidence. One of your clones could wipe out this battalion. 3 is just overkill," rang out Kurama's voice in Naruto's head. "While I would agree with you, One can never be too cautious. For all we know, the Titans could actually be powerful, thought Naruto. In reply, he returned to the waking world abruptly when he felt something poking him. He opened his eyes to see Hideki jabbing at him with his crutch. Man, Naruto-san, you freeze up at the weirdest times. Anyway, anything you can do will help, stated Hideki. He then proceeded to limp over to his horse, and, with some help from a few of the men, mounted. He stared down at Naruto, and gave him a hopeful look, before turning around and to address his men. Mount your horses, bellowed Hideki. Hideki turned his horse around once more and waited for his troops to get mounted. Naruto looked over at the clones, and gave them each a nod. The clones did a salute, placing their hands over their hearts and bowing, before turning around and sprinting in the direction of the ravine. Naruto watched as they descended down the ridge of the overlook, and out of sight. Well, at least out of sight for everyone except Naruto, who was actually seeing what they were seeing through their eyes. When Naruto had first gained his dojutsu, it had been a disorienting experience, seeing the world through up to 3 different perspectives. Now though, it was a normal thing, and provided a very good way to watch his own back during combat. Naruto pushed what his clones were seeing to the back of his mind. Running back to his horse, he leapt onto his horse's back. He was not a moment too soon. Right as he mounted, the group started to move forward. Naruto rode without thought, letting his horse do most of the leading. As he rode, he watched as his clones came upon their first Titan. They got into a formation that allowed them each enough space to not block one another's attacks. The Titan they were intent on destroying was 9 meters tall. The first Naruto clone sprinted faster than the others with chakra-enhanced steps. He was going to see how much blunt force this Titan could endure. The Titan turned toward the trio of Narutos. The first Naruto that had been sprinting in front of the 3 Narutos, around 6 meters away from the Titan, leapt into the air, and sunk his right fist into the Titan's right shoulder. The shoulder then proceeded to explode, having been overcharged with chakra. The Titan reeled back, not in pain, but from the sheer amount of force that had been put behind the punch. The Titan didn't do anything other than roar at the first Naruto, and when the Titan tried to pursue him, Naruto too leapt up from behind the Titan. The very air around his uplifted hand seemed to fluctuate and blur, as though it was moving at very high speeds. Naruto too brought down his hand in an arc right where the Titan's left shoulder was located. Long before the clone's hand ever touched it, the Titan's skin started rending and tearing away. Now clearly seen, a blade made of wind was slicing through the flesh of the Titan's arm, and in less than a second, the left arm was sliced off at the shoulder. The Titan roared once again, now attempting to bite Naruto 1 and 2, while its arms regenerated. It never noticed the barrage of small blue shuriken that were launched at it, nor the third Naruto who had launched them. Both Naruto's 1 and 2 vacated the area of the blast long before the shuriken hit. It was good that they did, because all the shuriken hit home and detonated into small spheres of chakra, 1.5 meters in diameter. After around 3 seconds, the spheres imploded upon themselves, leaving the Titan as no more than a few piles of flesh on the ground. Around 1 kilometer away, Naruto smiled. Kurama was right. The Titans were easy enough to kill. Hideki's group could also see the explosion of Naruto 3's ability when they reached the battle site. All who saw how little of the Titan was left gasped. Many of them had thought that the small mountain of flesh was the carcass of some large beast, until they saw the steam that was rising from it, and realized that it was Titan, with its trademark hyper-excelled decomposition. Naruto watched through his clone's eyes as they cleared a path for the group, killing any Titans that they encountered. When they reached the ravine, they took a peek over the edge. Naruto was impressed at the size of the ravine. It was much bigger than Valley of Death back in his world. That was the second largest valley, the first largest being one where no one except the native population had ventured. His clones turned to each other and nodded. Clones 1 and 2 fanned out left and right, while Naruto 3 dispelled. Naruto, on his horse, flinched in slight pain, the information from the clone flooding his senses. The Titans were, as Kurama predicted, very easy to kill. The first clone could have taken down the first Titan with relative ease. Using 3 was just Naruto being overly cautious. Naruto was fairly sure of his ability to kill these Titans, but he didn't want to allow himself to become overconfident. He hadn't encountered any of these aberrant Titans that Erwin and Ahia both spoke about, and from both accounts, these Titans seemed more powerful than the Titan his clones had encountered. Naruto got a bloodthirsty smile on his face. This'll be fun. I can't wait, thought Naruto. Kurama within his spot in the front of Naruto's mind frowned. This was not behavior he expected from this Naruto. He left his spot in Naruto's mind, which looked like a circular room with glass covering the entire wall. Behind the glass showed each of Naruto's conscious functions. Kurama left to pursue an area of the mind that was more or less Naruto's subconscious. Kurama, at least right now, looked like a man in his early 20s, dressed in a traditional black kimono. He had waist-length red hair, which swayed fluidly as walked. He had the same slit eyes as Naruto. Kurama found a door that read, subconscious. In bright red letters he opened the door and entered Naruto's mind. Naruto's mind was physically represented as a twisted and winding underground complex with doors leading to various memories. It was a place where someone could easily lose their way. Kurama had spent many years amongst these halls, and he knew his way around them. Deeper into Naruto's mind he went until he eventually came upon a chamber different than the rest of Naruto's mind. It was made of earth and stone instead of glass and metal. This room had no roof. Instead it extended into a darkness where not even Naruto had been. In front of the room stood a massive gate made of thick bronze bars, making it into a prison, yet nothing was holding the gate together, save a small piece of paper. On this paper, written in black kanji, was the word seal. The corner of the paper was eroded and fallen off from the gate. A small stream of sickly green chakra flowed into the rest of Naruto's mind. Kurama's frown turned into a snarl as he realized what was happening. He turned from the chamber and started shifting shape, his hair conforming into one long tail-like extension. His back began arching and his face started lengthening. His kimono melded with his body and started to shift until it became red fur. Within a span of a few seconds, Kurama had transformed into a fox. He then started to run if he could find Naruto. Then Naruto could transport Kurama where they needed to go, but he wasn't there, and this wasn't Kurama's mind, so Kurama had to take the long way to get to where he needed to go. Through many twists and turns, Kurama eventually made it to a section of the mind that looked like a combination between a hospital and a scientist's laboratory. This part of Naruto's mind was quite unusual, and for good reason, considering who the warden was. The doors in here had little slots in each of them, making this section also seem like it should be part of an asylum. Kurama shifted back into his human form, his fur weaving itself into a kimono and turning black. He walked to a door that was slightly ajar. Inside was Naruto. Except, it wasn't Naruto. This Naruto was dressed in a lab coat and had wavy, shoulder-length hair, definitely not spiky like Naruto's physical hair. Naruto was standing in front of a chalkboard doing an elaborate mathematical calculation. Once in a while, he would stop the large mathematical problem to write a much smaller, less complex problem. When he finished an equation, it would then peel itself from the board and fly to another room within Naruto's mind to be processed further. Kurama went up to him and tapped him on the shoulder. The only reason Naruto didn't notice Kurama was because he was working intently on possible ways of getting back to their own world, so when he felt the tap on his shoulder, he was taken completely by surprise. He reached inside of his lab coat and pulled out a small scalpel, as sharp as he could possibly think. Kurama was quite aware that Naruto would react this way, so right after he had tapped Naruto on his shoulder, he leapt away as quick as he could. Even so, sharp as one can think, is sharper than anything in the physical world. Even though the blade clearly missed Kurama, he was still cut. As soon as the cut was formed, it healed up, but it still caused Kurama pain, and he winced because of it. Kurama-san, you should know not to sneak up on me. For all I know, you could have been one of the more aggressive ideas, said Naruto. Putting away his scalpel, he turned around quickly and wrote a very simple-looking equation on the board, and two chairs appeared next to the chalkboard facing each other. Naruto took one of the chairs and gestured to the other. Kurama readjusted his kimono and took the seat opposite of Naruto. So Kurama-san, what did you come to see me for? Asked Naruto. Kurama looked at him intently before leaning forward in his seat. You've been slacking off, said Kurama. I don't know what you mean, Kurama-san, said Naruto, smiling, not really seeming to care. The seal is your responsibility. It's degraded under enough stress, he could break out, replied Kurama, leaning back in his chair. Naruto lost his smile. Why do you have me do it? Complained Naruto. He sprawled back over his chair. Because logic would try to destroy him, bloodlust would try to combat him, sin would strike a deal with him, and the others just don't have the power to control him, explained Kurama. Naruto just sort of drooped, before getting up and quickly scrawling something upon the board. The two chairs that he and Kurama were sitting on disappeared, causing Kurama to fall on his butt. Kurama, annoyed, got up from the floor, straightened out his kimono and started to leave. Oh, Kurama-san, said Naruto. Kurama turned around. Why don't you be a doll, and take this to his chamber? I hope you know how to seal. Naruto turned toward the board and wrote a few final variables in the large mathematical equation he had been working on when Kurama had come in. Right when he finished, the equation peeled itself off the board. It flew over to Kurama and then started to shift and line up until, in a large flash of light, a paper seal floated down to Kurama's hand. The seal looked exactly like the one in the large chamber with the large gates, except instead of black kanji, the kanji was red. Much smaller kanji outlined the border of the paper. Kurama chuckled, before putting the seal within a space within the sleeves of his kimono, much like Naruto would do. I'll make sure it gets done. Oh, and see, look behind you, said Kurama, sprinting out of the room. C turned around and shrieked. Standing at his board was a small, deformed midget that looked just like him. The midget was scribbling furiously all around the lab. Various things, from sake, to fruits, to furniture, started randomly appearing. No, bad mini C, don't do that. Kurama smiled as C kept on trying to keep the mini version of himself from destroying the lab. Naruto felt his body relax slightly. The slight bloodlust that had been afflicting him for the last 2 hours was gone. The group had stopped at the edge of the ravine. The ravine was ominous. A cold fall air had made the stone walls of the ravine slick with water, and the bottom was concealed by a thick layer of fog. This made Naruto wonder if a large body of water was nearby. He hadn't seen a marine layer that morning, but perhaps later he would see one. The group had stopped at the edge of the ravine to briefly rest their horses. Within 10 minutes the group had turned right and was following the edge of the ravine. Naruto's clones had encountered a few titans. All of them had been easy enough to kill. Still, they hadn't encountered an aberrant yet, and it irked him. Naruto decided to have one of his clones go into the foggy depths. The clone nodded to the mental command sent by the original. The clone turned toward the ravine. Before stopping at the edge, he tried to sense what was in the ravine, but with his decreased chakra reserves and only being a clone of the original, his abilities were not as refined. So, while he did try to sense, he did not pick up much other than a flock of birds. He didn't sense anything. He walked away from the edge about 4 meters, before turning toward it once again, sprinting, and leaping off the edge. As he plunged into the depths of fog, it could immediately tell something was wrong. The fog he was falling through was much thicker than normal fog and had the stench sulfur. When Naruto passed through the fog layer, he was met with a terrible sight. What he had taken for a flock of birds was in actuality a large concentration of titans. These titans were odd. They moved with uncoordinated strides and were very spastic. The clone came crashing to the bottom of the ravine, using chakra to enhance his body and withstand the fall. The momentum he had gained caused him to crater into the ground. The noise attracted the attention of every titan in the vicinity, and all of them turned toward him. There were 12 titans, each of them twisted in their own way. Among them was a 15-meter class titan. It was crouched next to the canyon wall, partially obscured by a low wall of dirt. Its face bore a chilling smile that contained 10 too many teeth. Its eyes, which were incredibly disproportionate from its head, were open and bloodshot. The other titans all bore smiles similar to the 15-meter titan. With personal differences, one titan had long sharp nails, but it was stunted, being only 8 meters. The Naruto clone set his body into a defensive stance, waiting for the titans to come to him. But instead of their usual lumber, the titans rushed him at incredible speeds, one of them falling on all fours like a massive, demented, 4-legged spider. The titan with the long fingernails launched itself at the clay-like walls of the ravine. When it reached the wall, its fingernails dug into the soft clay and it propelled itself toward Naruto. The only titan that did not move incredibly fast was the 15-meter titan, which didn't move, staying behind the rest. Naruto's clone was completely unprepared for the spontaneous rush, so by the time he reacted, the titans had a large advantage. The first titans to reach him, the 13 and 14-meter titans with the largest stride, were met with a barrage of the blue orbs that the third Naruto clone had shot when they encountered their first titan. This took out 3 titans, the clone having fired the maximum of 10, 1 per finger. The next titans to reach him were the 9 and 10-meter titans, as well as the titan with long fingernails. The 9 and 10-meter titans that reached him were 7 in number. He dodged under the swipe of one, and, using chakra-enhanced wind, sliced it in half, then into fourths, then into eighths. The clumps of titan fell into a messy pile behind him. The next 2 titans that came upon him both dived at him. He leapt up into the air, then flipped over the attack from the long-nailed titan, which had jumped off the wall when it saw the Naruto clone dodge into the air. While in his back flip, the clone slid his hands into his sleeves and pulled out 2 kunai knives. He used them to slice a sizable chunk from the flying titan's neck. The long-nailed titan slammed into the other side of the ravine, steam rising from its cut flesh, mingling with the sulphurous cloud above them. The clay substance that made up the side of the ravine had a massive dent where the titan hit the wall. The clone had no rest whatsoever, because right when he landed, the 2 titans he had dodged rushed up and dove for him again, deciding to stay on the ground this time. Naruto ran forward and sprinted past their dive, causing them to go past him instead of hitting him. As the titans were getting up, the clone turned around to face them and launched 4 of the blue orbs of destruction. It wasn't a moment later that the titans were engulfed by the blue explosions. 4 of the 8-meter titans rushed up to him while his back was turned, but he had been prepared for them. Naruto blurred before disappearing in a swirl of dust. He reappeared behind last of the running titans, and sliced the tendons in its left leg with one of his kunai. The titan tried to turn around to face Naruto, but when it placed its weight down its left leg, its body collapsed. The other three pivoted around to face the clone. Before sprinting at him again, he sprinted towards them as well. Holding the two kunai in either hand, he jumped over the downed titan and spun in the air to avoid the hand of the first of the three titans. He stabbed his kunai in the arm and whiplashed himself up into the air. High above the titan's head, the three titans looked up, but couldn't stop the momentum of their sprint. As Naruto's clone started to fall, he used chakra to fortify his body and propel himself toward the ground as he sped down toward the titans. He held the kunai out on either side of his body. Naruto started to spin, and as the titans started to slow down, he came upon them, a whirling spiral of death to the naked eye. Naruto's clone would have looked less like a human, and more like a distorted tornado. He plowed feet first toward the ground and, guiding himself using chakra-enhanced air, took out two of the titans who had been standing closely together. When he impacted upon the earth, he sprayed out dirt and stone. Before landing in a martial arts stance, he had barely touched the ground before he started sprinting toward the third titan of the group. As the titan turned around, Naruto leapt toward the side of the titan that was turning away. Using timing and precision, he sliced with the titan's movement, and when the titan had fully turned to where the clone had been a moment ago, it was dead. The titan that he had disabled earlier had regenerated, and was getting up. Naruto rushed over and stabbed a kunai into its eye and jumped away. The beast roared in rage at not being able to see. It flailed out in front of itself. The clone then rushed to the side to try to get a better vantage point. He had to dodge to the side though. As the spider-like titan had attempted to eat him, it ran forward on all four limbs, and using unknown agility, pursued Naruto's clone. As the clone was sprinting, he made a hand seal and blurred out of existence for a moment. He reappeared on the titan's back. He glued himself to the titan's back with chakra and started to walk along its spine, all the while the titan was spinning erratically, attempting to reach the clone of Naruto. It sprinted toward the wall of the ravine, but right as it was about to reach the wall, the clone had made it to its neck. He stabbed down into its neck and sliced out a sizable portion of the nape. Right as he did this, the titan's body started to crumple up, and momentum made it skid across the ground. As this was happening, Naruto's clone did a high back layout off the titan's body and landed on the oddly soft, wet earth of the ravine. The titan Naruto's clone had stabbed in the eye ran over and dove for him. He turned and blurred once more, and the titan crashed where he was standing. He reappeared on the titan's head, placed a piece of paper, similar to the one in his mind, on its neck. Before flipping away, the paper started burning. The titan got up quickly enough and ran after him. The clone didn't pay much attention to the titan though, instead trying to find the 15-meter titan that had been in the ravine around 6 meters away from him. The top half of the titan exploded in a cloud of blood and steam. Naruto's clone scanned the ravine for the 15-meter titan, but could find no trace of it. He tried to sense it with chakra, but with his nearly depleted reserves, and the fact that he was a clone, it was of no use. He tried feeling out the earth, vibrations and such, but little warning did he get, before he was engulfed by a mouth full of too many teeth. Out of the ground burst the 15-meter titan, its gaping maw filled with earth and stone. Naruto's clone dispersed, having been damaged enough to cause it to disperse. The titan closed its mouth and swallowed down the dirt. It climbed out of the hole it had created and, turning toward the hole, vomited the earth back into the hole, concealing it. The titan then walked over to the low wall of dirt, stepped over it and crouched in it again. If one were to look over the small mound of dirt, they would see a hole, leading to a complex tunnel system. Naruto shuddered on his horse, the pain from his clone being eaten alive impacting his body. The group had been traveling only about 5 minutes, and that was all the time it had taken for the battle to take place. They were moving at a brisk trot, seeing no titans in their vicinity. He looked to his left, into the ravine. The same fog layer his clone had passed through, concealing the floor of the ravine. Across the ravine, about 80 kilometers away, Wall Maria could be seen, slightly larger than it had been on the ridge. Behind the group, Ahia still rode. Naruto slowed down his horse slightly to fall back to Ahia. "Ahia-san, how is it that you survived the ravine?" asked Naruto. Ahia looked over at him. "What do you mean, Naruto?" responded Ahia. "My clone took a trip down there and, despite his powers, got eaten. I want to know how you survive," said Naruto. Ahia sighed and looked down into the fog of the ravine. "Well, started out Ahia, when we enter the ravine, the exit is only about 400 meters away. Our best strikers would take to the air on 3D maneuver gear, while the others would ride near the edges. The only problem with that plan is the cart. It can't ride near the sides due to outcropping rocks and such, meaning it has to move in the center of the ravine. For every titan we meet in the ravine, we usually lose 1 to 2 people guarding the cart," explained Ahia. "Why do you place so much value on this cart? The value of cripples and the injured can't possibly be worth multiple, still operable, people?" queried Naruto. Ahia nodded in understanding. "I know what you mean. Well, other than the injured, that cart carries 2 things," replied Ahia. "And what would that be?" asked Naruto. The first would be the compiled reports of all of our outings and things that we have seen, from the amount of titans, to the weather, stated Ahia. It also carries the assurance that you won't be left behind that cart, said Ahia, gesturing toward the cart in front of them. As one of the things that hold the Recon Corp together, it assures the men that no matter what happens to them, they will have a chance at coming home. Naruto nodded in understanding. You still haven't told me how you make it through the ravine, chided Naruto. Ahia looked at him annoyed. I'm getting there, responded Ahia. He sighed, the weight of years of service to humanity showing. When I said that we lose 1 to 2 men for every titan we meet, I wasn't exaggerating. When the strike team falls, the only way we make it by the titans is by distracting them from the main group. Primarily, giving them a target to chase. Usually the titan will forsake chasing the larger group, instead going after the target that is closest. But, said Naruto, predicting what Ahia was going to say. Ahia turned toward him, a grim smile on his lips. But, the titans down there are aberrants, and even if you can get close enough to kill them, the speed at which they move makes it difficult to land a killing blow, Ahia explained. Sounds hellish, stated Naruto. Ahia nodded wordlessly. Naruto looked toward the ravine, then to the group in general. Well, Ahia-san, Erwin hired me to fight for him, and humanity, so if protecting the group is benefiting humanity, I have no choice but to do so, said Naruto. Ahia looked over at Naruto, shaking his head. While it is nice that you wish to protect us, it would be an exercise in futility, said Ahia. Naruto shrugged his shoulders in indifference, not really caring what Ahia said. He didn't know what he could do. Naruto reached his hand into his sleeves, before pulling out a strange knife. It resembled a kunai, but instead of a straight blade with no guard, this kunai had 2 bladed guards protruding from either side. The grip of the weapon was odd as well. Instead of leather or cloth, the grip was a piece of paper with elaborate sealwork inscribed upon it. Ahia looked at the weapon suspiciously. He was surprised when Naruto tossed the kunai to him. He fumbled it in his hands for a moment, making sure not to cut himself. Ahia looked at Naruto with inquiring eyes. Should you come to danger that is too much for you handle, stab that knife into anything, and you shall receive help, said Naruto. Ahia looked at Naruto for a moment. Before reaching into a pouch on his hip, he pulled out a flare gun and tossed it to Naruto. Shoot that into the air, and help won't be far away. There is only 1 shot in there though, so use it wisely, cautioned Ahia. Naruto looked down at the flare gun, before slipping it into his sleeves. Thank you, Ahia-san, said Naruto, courteously. The same to you, replied Ahia in kind. They both stayed at a brisk trot about 10 meters behind the group. They didn't really speak, instead, enjoying the calmness that was given to them. However, briefly, it was the briefness that made the silence truly valuable, because both knew that once they entered the ravine, such a commodity would be non-existent. Out of the ravine, many fissures spread, like small roots, grasping the earth around them. It was in one of these fissures that the south entrance to the ravine lay. The troop was sitting at the beginning of the fissure. Hideki had stopped the group just a few minutes past, and was now calling out to the mass of riders behind him. We have arrived to the ravine, said Hideki, albeit loudly enough that everyone could hear him. Strike teams, to the front. From the group of riders, several men came forward to sit on their mounts at the front of the group. You all know what your job is, correct? Inquired Hideki. Every man at the front saluted before shouting. To clear the path for the cart, and to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Hideki nodded. He gave a salute from atop his mount. Unable to dismount, due to his leg, he was turned around and raised his hand, about to give the signal to ride forward. When he felt a tap on his left shoulder, he turned his head to see Naruto upon his own mount. Hideki was startled, not even hearing Naruto or his mount come forward. What is it, Naruto-san? Inquired Hideki. I think I could be of more use to you as a striker, stated Naruto. Hideki frowned. I don't think you should. Even if you were the best fighter in the world, the science reps will want to analyze you, do experiments. Even if you were the best, I can't justifiably let you fight when you might have something that could be invaluable to humanity. One man can only do so much, Hideki replied. Naruto looked at Hideki for a moment before turning his horse and trotted over to the strikers. He turned his mount around once more and stood relatively uniform to the other strikers. Hideki's gaze hardened, visibly disgruntled by the blatant disregard to his command. I only let you know as a courtesy. Erwin hired me as a mercenary and I intend to earn my payment. If he hears that I let you guys get slaughtered, one man can be the deciding factor between victory and defeat, said Naruto. Hideki looked miffed, but didn't say anything. Instead, he was going to bring it up with Erwin once he came back to the wall. He was aware that Naruto and Erwin had made a deal. He just didn't know what it entailed. For now though, Hideki just turned around, raised his hand as he had done before Naruto interrupted him, and called the march. Riders of the Reacon Corps, called out Hideki. Those who were still mounted reaffirmed their grips on the reins of their horses. Strikers, All the strikers drew blades and prepared to launch into the ravine. Naruto drew from his sleeves a long, Nodaichi-style blade in a plain black sheath. He crouched down, holding his sheathed sword, as he did not have an obi. Forward, as one unit, they surged ahead, the strikers' horses like a blur as they, and the group, descended into the ravine. Naruto was clinging to the walls of the ravine like a spider around him. On the floor of the ravine lay 3 steaming corpses of titans. He had just sheathed his Nodaichi when the group came into view, moving at a very fast canter, almost a gallop. Thus far only one man had died, and they were already a third of the way to the north entrance. The striker teams were doing well, although Naruto was taking the brunt of the kills. He had left his horse a little while back, opting instead to run along the walls. This provided him with good vantage points to kill the titans. He had used very little chakra thus far, only what he needed to allow himself to run along the walls and enhance his muscles enough to run in front of the group. Even so, he had dispelled his third and final clone, choosing to regain the chakra he had invested in it. They had been charging for close to 10 minutes, and from what Naruto estimated, they still had another 20 or so minutes to go. The distance from the south entrance to the north entrance was about 3 kilometers. This distance could be traversed in short enough time, but with the titans and the rock fall from the ravine, the going could be difficult, especially for the wagon, and with the sulphurous cloud layer above them. The sunlight was twisted, filling the ravine with dim, sickly red light, lowering visibility. The cloud layer hindered air movement in the ravine, so it was quite musty and had an almost stale feeling to it. Naruto moved on ahead, the group being safe for the time being. The other strikers had been moving behind him, intending on taking any titans that he didn't get. Some would take this as cowardice, but others would call it smart. The next group of titans that he found was 4 12 and 13-meter titans. He ran along the wall at a very high speed, before leaping toward them. Drawing his sword in mid-jump, he started spinning. Gaining momentum, the titans turned to look at him, but as the first one looked at him, it had its head sliced in 2 by Naruto's sword. He landed on the floor of the ravine, before sprinting toward the nearest titan and slicing the tendons in its ankles. The titans had been standing in a somewhat diamond shape, and Naruto had just taken out the first and last in the diamond behind him. There were 2 titans on either side of him, but he was out of their swiping distance. The titans rushed toward him. The one on his left took a dive for him. Naruto sheathed his sword, threw it behind him very high, and did several back handsprings, dodging out of the way of the falling titan. He did this all in the same movement. The titan that hadn't dived for him, the one on his right, turned and ran toward him. He stopped, and caught his sheathed sword, unsheathed it, and ran toward the titan. The titan swiped at Naruto when he was close enough. Naruto dodged the swipe, and ran under the titan and sliced its feet off at the ankles. The titan fell, making 3 titans disabled. The titan that dove for him had gotten up when he was doing his back handsprings. It started to sprint at him, much like the last titan had just done. Naruto waited, not doing anything, aware that the titan he had just temporarily crippled was crawling toward him. The sprinting titan reached him first, but right before the titan could take a swipe at him, he leapt into the air impossibly high. The titan looked in the air to see Naruto, sword sheathed, pointing his index and middle at them. On the tips, 2 small, blue, marble-sized orbs were forming. It wasn't a moment later that Naruto muttered something under his breath. Sasuyu na Hari, piercing needle. As he said this, the blue orbs exploded from his fingers, streaking toward the titans. The first orb impacted with the only standing titan, taking out both the standing titan and the titan who was crawling up behind Naruto. The second orb impacted between the titan without a head, and the titan was without tendons. It was getting up, having just healed. The second orb expanded larger than the other, engulfing both titans in blue chakra-induced light. Naruto, seeing that the titans were killed, moved on down the ravine, the strikers following in the wake of his destruction. Because the ravine was, for the most part, straight, the group of Recon Corp that had been following Naruto and the strikers had been seeing this light show and were awed by his power. This also put Hideki in a sour mood, because Naruto had been right. Even if Hideki complained about insubordination, Naruto wasn't part of the military, so Erwin couldn't do anything, assuming he actually would do anything. They had only lost 1 man thus far, 2, if you counted the unlucky bastard whose horse died. Even so, having only 2 deaths thus far was unheard of, especially in the ravine. They had also seen the bodies that Naruto had left behind, and most were just a few lumps of skin, nothing more. The body that the strikers killed was the first body that the group of riders had seen that was whole since they entered the ravine. The group saw another flash of blue and looked to see Naruto killing another titan, this one an 11-meter class. They watched as he flipped over the titan and landed on its back, driving his blade into the nape of its neck. Before yanking out the blade and slicing its head in 2, he jumped off its back as it was falling, and attached himself to the wall of the ravine. He started running along wall, before he disappeared behind an outcrop of rock along the wall. Naruto ran for a little while, the group shrinking away behind him, before coming upon another group of titans. This group consisted of two 15-meter titans and one 10-meter titan. He drew his Nodaichi and held it out behind him as he was about 20 meters away from the three titans. He flipped away from the wall of the ravine, landing on the ground and continuing his sprint. The titans turned and started lumbering toward him. The 10-meter titan fell down onto its hands and crawled at extremely fast speeds, similar to the one his clone contended with in another part of the ravine. The 10-meter titan was the first to reach Naruto. It lunged at him with an open maw. Its jaw was dislocated, making the titan look like some demented bastard offspring of a spider and a python. Naruto dodged to the left and held out his Nodaichi to his right as he ran beside the crawling titan. When the blade met the titan in the side of its stretched jaw, it started to slice through the flesh like a knife through water, effortlessly cutting away at the titan's body as Naruto ran. His blade moved with him, and when he had run past the crawling titan, it collapsed onto the floor of the ravine, having been thoroughly gutted, its stomach fluids flowing onto the ground. The next of the titans, the 15-meter titans, both kept on lumbering toward him, not acknowledging the titan Naruto had just killed. They both were next to each other with only a few feet between them. They were about 12 meters away. Naruto put up his left hand, and making a symbol with his hands, his index and middle fingers pointing straight up, while his remaining fingers were curled. Kage Bunshin, Shadow Clone. He muttered beside him. A clone appeared holding an exact replica of Naruto's Nodaichi. They both ran up to the titans, and when they reached 6 meters away from the titans, they both leapt up at the titans with incredible force, being exact mirrors of each other. They both bisected the titans in an upward slanting angle at the waist. Both of them were still flying through the air, their momentum causing them to still be flying upwards. Both Narutos reached toward each other, before grasping each other at the wrist. The original Naruto then flung his clone back at the stunted titans. The clone held up the same symbol that Naruto held when he was created. As he landed between the two titans, he closed his hand. Naruto, who had been holding the same symbol as he flew through the air, closed his hand as well. The clone closed his eyes right as he detonated, creating a massive explosion of fire and smoke. Naruto didn't cringe, having used the technique many times in the guerrilla tactics his village had used at the beginning of his war. He didn't even need to say the name aloud, unless he needed to make the clone extremely powerful. He landed and looked toward the smoke cloud to make sure the two didn't survive. After a second or two, he jumped to the walls and continued down the ravine. Ahia rode at the back of the group, years of service having taught him that being far from the titans usually meant that you weren't killed by them. He had seen the light show that Naruto put on. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't impressed and a little awed, but in the Recon Corps you became accustomed to odd happenings. Once, when he was just a new recruit in the Northern Recon Corps, he had seen a great comet that lit the sky day and night for 3 weeks. It awed him that there could be such an object in the sky, that it could rival the sun and moon in brightness. The awe he felt then was similar to the one that he felt here, impressive, even frightening at first, but fleeting. He was more focused on his immediate surroundings anyway. There were titans in the ravine that were known to hide amongst the rocks near the cloud layer. He looked to his right and saw a steaming hunk of titans. Similar pieces of flesh had been strewn about the ravine, some even sticking to the walls. Ahia chuckled. "You have to give it to him," said Ahia to no one in particular. "When it comes to killing, he knows no restraint." In front of them another explosion. Ahia gave a grim smile before shaking his head. "Just proves my point." He urged his horse forward with a flick of his reins. While being in the back of the group keeps you away from the titans in front, falling too far behind leaves alone and easy pickings for the ones in the back. Naruto sheathed his sword, having just detonated another Bunshin Daibakua, clone great explosion. Using the same tactic against these titans as he had against the previous pair of titans, he was running along the sides of the walls. As he had been doing his whole time in the ravine, a shadow fell over him, and by some instinct he had gained through years as a shinobi, he dodged off the wall, allowing the titan to fall past him. Naruto fell to the ground, but still landed on his feet. When he landed, he looked to see a titan looking almost identical to the long-nailed titan his clone had fought earlier. Its nails were about 2 meters long, and looked vicious. Being on both hands and feet, it was crawling along the wall very speedily, its body contorting in sickening ways, making it look very much like a lizard, unlike the other which was more cautious and reminded Naruto of a spider. It bent its neck at 180 degrees so that when it looked at Naruto, the back of its head was touching his shoulders. Naruto unsheathed his sword, before sprinting at the wall of the ravine. The titan did something unusual and hissed at Naruto, although the hiss sounded more like a strangled gasp than a true hiss. It crawled down the wall to meet Naruto. He decided instead to shorten the trip and jumped at the titan while it was still attached to the wall. Naruto drove his Nodaichi into the titan's mid-back, staking it to the wall. Naruto back flipped off the titan, who was now squirming, trying to detach itself from Naruto's sword. Naruto landed on the ground, before once more leaping toward the Titan. As he moved toward the Titan, Naruto put his hand back and a blue orb the size of a grapefruit started to form in his hand. The blue orb looked exactly like the small, marble-sized orbs that appeared on his fingertips whenever he did his Sasuyu Nahari, piercing needle. Naruto grasped the orb, and as he reached the Titan's neck, he thrust forward with the orb, and started to carve a chunk out of the Titan's neck wherever the blue orb touched. The flesh would vaporize away before long. Naruto had the entire neck area completely destroyed, leaving the head to hang by a few bits of flesh. The Titan hung limp, and when Naruto pulled his sword free from the rock, the Titan falling to the ground in a lifeless heap, Naruto turned, having attached himself to the wall to retrieve his sword, and started to sprint onward. Naruto started to keep his eyes out for the exit. They had been traveling for nearly 10 minutes, so the exit had to be close. He had gone ahead of the strikers, so if he came upon the exit, he would be the first one to find it, but he kept on running. He would come upon it eventually. After another minute or so, he came upon another group of Titans, this one consisting of only 2 Titans. They were about 15 meters apart. The closest one was around 13 meters tall, and the other was slightly taller at 14 meters when Naruto was about 50 meters from the first Titan. The Titan had a slight spasm, before looking at Naruto with a terrifying face. The face was quite disfigured, like most Titans, but the difference was that this Titan's face was stretched, like rubber pulled taut, and the eyes, which were usually terrifying, gone, not like they had been gouged out, but just gone, like the Titan was created without them. In their place were dark pits. The Titan turned toward Naruto, and started running at him, albeit a very awkward run. Naruto didn't know how this Titan had known he was there, since all of the Titans he had encountered relied on sight and touch for the most part. Erwin had told him that Titans could sense where people were, but he not expected the Titan to sense him as well as it did. Naruto still ran along the wall, and when the Titan reached him, it stopped, and looked up at Naruto with unseeing eyes. Naruto kept on running along the wall, and the Titan followed. Naruto, losing interest in the Titan, drew his Nodaichi, and held it towards the Titan. He jumped off the wall, and dove. When he was about 3 meters above the Titan, it reached out with arm and caught his downward momentum with its arm, and instead of having Naruto's blade impale its head, its arm caught the blade instead, the blade piercing all the way down to the hilt in the Titan's palm. The Titan closed its hand into a fist. Intent on crushing Naruto, he leapt away before that could happen. Leaving his sword sheathed in the Titan's flesh, Naruto landed, and slid his hands into his sleeves and pulled out 2 kunai. The other Titan, the one 15 meters away, noticed the commotion, and started walking over. It had eyes, although its legs were freakishly large, having stringy, deformed musculature. Its walk started to break into a sprint. The eyeless Titan sensed the sprinting Titan and stumbled out of the way. Naruto saw the sprinting Titan and turned to face it. He crouched on the ground and waited for it to come to him. Right when the Titan was about to come upon Naruto, he jumped into the air incredibly high. In the middle of the air, right above the Titan's head, he flipped over so that his head was facing down and the Titan's neck was right where his blades would be. His kunai, which were not long enough to even pierce the Titan's skin, shimmered with invisible air extending quite a few feet from the kunai. When he sliced down with them, the skin of the Titan started to open long before the kunai even touching the flesh. The Titan stepped past Naruto. The near entirety of its neck was gone, and after another step, it collapsed and tumbled sprawling across the floor of the ravine. Naruto landed safely, but had to dodge right away, due to the eyeless Titan coming after him. Naruto ran to wall before jumping onto it. He then ran up it past the Titan's reach and crouched onto the wall. Holding with both hands as well as feet, the eyeless Titan went up to the wall, and looked up at him, much like it had when Naruto first attempted to kill it with his sword. He closed his eyes for a moment, before placing his hands together, and formed a seal. His thumb, index finger, and middle finger were all pointing up, in relation to Naruto. While his ring and pinky fingers were interlocked, he then took a deep breath, before shouting, "Kaiten. Goryuka no Jutsu, fire release, Great Dragon Fire Technique." From his mouth, a mass of barely visible white fire spilled out. The fire took the shape of dragon and headed toward the Titan. The dragon roared toward the Titan, the air around it superheating and moving upward, before being stopped by the dense sulfurous layer. The dragon met the eyeless Titan. The Titan's flesh just started curling up. All moisture evaporated from it almost instantly, and after that the skin took fire. When the dragon passed the Titan, all that remained was a blackened husk of skin that, when Naruto touched it, crumbled away and fell apart into ash where the Titan had been. All that remained was Naruto's Nodaichi, untouched by the flames, a seal on the base of the blade glowing extremely bright. Naruto performed another jutsu, giving the stone of the ravine, bright red with heat, a thick layer of earth so that the horses would not be hurt. He walked to the center of the dirt where his sword was. He thrust his hand into the earth, until he found the hilt of his sword. Naruto grimaced, and when he pulled his hand out, it was completely charred black. He put his sword back in its sheath and started to flex his fingers on his charred hand. Flakes of stinking flesh fell from the hand, exposing muscle underneath, except this muscle was looking odd, writhing in odd ways, and soon skin started to form above the muscle, and not long after his hand was completely operable again, not even looking like it had been burnt to a crisp moments before. He turned and looked down the ravine. He couldn't see any titans or the exit, but the air was feeling a bit cleaner. He shook his head and leapt up to the wall before resuming his sprint along the ravine. At the north entrance there were about 14 titans that Naruto could see. That made sense considering that the entrance was the easiest place to get into the ravine, but it was still the largest group of titans he had faced, thus hadn't noticed him yet because he had placed himself next to the cloud layer and he was also pretty far away from them. He couldn't use any of his AoE jutsu because the ravine acted as a funnel, and would probably destroy the front half of the group of riders, so he restricted himself to use of his sword. Naruto chuckled. I'm starting to be like Lee. Naruto drew his sword, before sighing. Well, if I'm going to be like him, I shouldn't half-ass it. Naruto closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and rushed towards the titans, and, about 60 meters above them, leapt off the wall. By the power of youth, I shall burn you with my undying will of fire. Naruto's battle cry echoed through the ravine as he brought his sword down upon the first titan, completely splitting it in two. All the titans turned toward Naruto, who was right in the center of them as if by some invisible command. Every titan simultaneously rushed towards him. The first titans to reach him dove for him. He leapt backward over the heads toward the exit of the ravine. When he landed, he had all of the titans in his field of view, allowing him to react to them much better than if he was in the center of them. The titans who had been on the outer edges of the pack, mainly those who were too small to get past the bigger titans, got to him first and were the first to resume the attack. The first one to reach him was a 6-meter titan. The titan's hand raced toward Naruto, attempting to grab him. Naruto's Nodaichi flashed, slicing the hand off the wrist. He didn't wait for the titan to recover, hopping onto its arm and running along its length. When he reached the shoulder, he sliced the arm off. The titan reached up and tried to grab him, so Naruto hopped onto its head. He stabbed his sword into the head, and slid it down its scalp, splitting the back half of the titan's head open. When he reached the titan's neck, he took the blade out of the titan's head, spun, and sliced out a large chunk of the titan's neck. Naruto leapt off the titan, the force from the jump pushing it to the ground. The other titans were not idle while this was happening. 3 of them, all of whom were in between 8 and 10 meters tall, had run up during the battle, and when Naruto landed, one of them jumped for him right away. He dodged right, twisting so that he was facing them from Naruto's position. They looked to be in a line in front of him. They turned and started to run toward him, their lopsided strides hindering them some. Naruto turned his body so that his right shoulder was facing them. He held his Nodaichi at his side, next to its sheath. The seal on the base of the blade started to glow bright red, its light similar to the light coming from the clouds above them. The light from seal covered the blade of his Nodaichi in a coat of red chakra that swirled and writhed like as if barely contained. Naruto lunged forward and swiped upward toward the line of titans. A red line trailed behind his sword, and when his sword reached the zenith of its swing, the red line exploded forward, turning into a crescent of fire. When the flame impacted with the first titan, it was bisected from groin to head. The second titan didn't fare much better, having the flame explode in front of it, and having its flesh more or less melted from its bones. The third titan survived the fiery projectile, having lost its power on the third, but it was cut down by Naruto, who was sprinting behind his attack. Naruto turned towards the rest of the titans, when a foot impacted with his torso, sending him flying into the wall of the ravine. He was slumped against the wall, having lost his wind from the impact upon the wall. He looked up to see 2 titans, one of which was a 15-meter, the smaller one, a 12-meter titan, ran at him, intent on eating him. During his moment of weakness it jumped at him, but while it was flying through the air, Naruto got back his wind and he leapt out of the way. The titan's face met the wall with a meaty thud, a web of cracks spread from the impact. The other titan walked over to Naruto in an awkward walk, looking like it was drunk. Halfway over to Naruto, the titan actually fell down. It started to crawl over to him, seemingly being unable to walk anymore. Naruto didn't have time to stare at the spectacle, because another titan had walked up and was coming from his side. 6 more were following it. The titan that had slammed its head into the wall was also getting up. Naruto saw stones lodged in its face that were quickly being pushed out of its skin by a healing factor that was as impressive as his own. The titan coming from his side was stumbling towards Naruto, as were the titans that were following it. The reason was because all the titans that were fast had reached Naruto first, along with those who were at the edge of the group and had been killed first, leaving the slow titans to be the last. The titan that had crashed into the wall ran at him once more, appearing to be the last titan that could run. Naruto got in a sword stance, before starting to sprint towards the running titan, leaving the slow titans for later, or, if he somehow died, the only one that the strikers would have to deal with. The titan drew back its foot mid-stride, intent on kicking Naruto. Once again Naruto dodged to the side. The leg was now next to him and, not one to waste an opportunity, Naruto took his sword and, when he reached the knee, sliced off the leg. The titan fell forward. Not having a leg to support itself, Naruto climbed onto its back and ran to its neck, where he promptly sliced into it, his sword cutting deep. The titan started steaming immediately. He turned toward the herd of titans that were slowly walking towards him, many of which had disturbing deformities. Seeing the group was only a few minutes away from his position, he climbed down from the titan he was on, and started to run towards them. The first titan he went to was the drunken titan, which was trying to get up. It fell down again, and Naruto jumped onto its back, before swinging his sword, and decapitating it. After that, he resumed his sprint towards the group of titans in front of him. The first titan Naruto came upon had arms as long as its legs, and its knuckles were dragging along the ground. When Naruto came up, it tried to hit him, but its arm took too long to draw back. By the time it had its arms coming forward in an attack, he had already decapitated it. He started to run after that. The next three titans he took in stride, leaping from one to the next, decapitating them as he went. The next titan he met didn't last long either. He leapt up at it, and spun with his sword held out, cutting off its head. When he landed, he ran up to the next one, and cut off its feet at the ankles, its stumps spewing blood that evaporated as soon as it met the air. The titan fell forward, but Naruto was there to meet it, and by the time the body had hit the earth, the head was already rolling off somewhere. The last titan in the small group had a terrifying deformity. It had mouth that took up most of its face in a horrifying grin, which was full of teeth that were sharp and unnatural in any human mouth. Naruto sprinted up to the titan, and jumped into the air, thrusting his sword at its neck, hoping to get a quick kill. Instead, the titan leaned down slightly, and when Naruto had thrust his sword into its neck, it opened its mouth and chomped down on Naruto's straw hat. Naruto sliced side to side, and decapitated the titan. He leapt off the titan, and out of the way. Naruto reached up, and pulled off his straw hat, exposing his head to the world. The top of it had a large chunk taken out of it. He gave an annoyed mumble, before tossing it away. "That was a good hat," he complained, before reaching into sleeves and pulling out an exact duplicate of the hat. He placed it back on his head, and his face was once again concealed. He looked down the ravine one way, then the other. To his right, he saw the group of riders, along with the strikers, whom Naruto had told to hold back in case he used an ability that could endanger them. To his left he saw the exit, a steadily sloping rising path that disappeared into the clouds above them. It was on this path that the last titan stood. Naruto, not really wanting to deal with the titan, pointed his index finger at it. On the tip, one of his Sasu Unahari, piercing needles, was forming. When it reached sufficient size, he wordlessly launched it, and not a moment after that, there was one less titan in the world. Naruto turned away and jumped onto the wall. The group was still a few minutes away with nothing else to do. Naruto assumed a lotus position and started to calm himself after the battle. It was really pointless, all things considered, but Naruto liked the calm stillness of focusing upon oneself. Naruto closed his eyes, stilled his breath, and dove into his mind. Naruto awoke within his mind. His physical self was still sitting in a lotus position on the wall of the ravine. He looked around. He was in his command center, sitting in the command chair in the middle of the room. All around him were the windows that represented his senses, each displaying their respective selves in their own odd ways. Naruto rose from his command chair before walking over to a door in the wall of his command center labeled Common Room. Naruto walked in. His mental senses were immediately assaulted by sights and odors he didn't want to see or smell ever again. With a wave of his hand, the room was devoid of all smell and furniture and other things. After that, all that was left was a white room with two people in it, standing about 2 meters apart. One of the two was Kurama, who was smirking. The other was a clone of Naruto, except he was different than Naruto, in the same way that Mr. C was different. This Naruto had a shaved head and had a long scar across his face instead of the long coat that Naruto wore. The scarred Naruto was wearing a combat vest with a black undershirt. He wore khaki, cargo-style pants with many pockets. His face was the epitome of rage. He looked at Kurama. His teeth were bared, showing elongated fangs where his incisors should have been. Kurama was still wearing his black kimono, although it was slightly disheveled with a tear running down his left sleeve. He stood straight, smugness coming off him in waves. "Welcome, Naruto. B-san and I were just having a small dispute. Nothing to worry about, isn't that right, B-san?" said Kurama, looking over towards Naruto. B snarled at him, before pulling out a nasty-looking curved kukri. No, you dishonorable bastard, said B, lunging at Kurama with his kukri. Kurama stepped to the side, dodging the swipe. Ooh, such language. I was just being polite and then you just go off and start cursing. Have you no shame? Chided Kurama. Obviously goading on B. Naruto stepped into the room, holding out his hand. Both Kurama and B went stock still, seemingly unable to move. So, what was it this time? Said Naruto addressing Mr. B. Fucker cheated. I don't know how he did it, but he did, replied Mr. B angrily. Oh, is that so? Then pray tell, how I can cheat at shogi, replied Kurama snidely. Mr. B didn't respond, instead trying to break loose of Naruto's mental hold. Naruto just looked at his counterpart, before face-palming, contemplating on how this thing could be a part of him. After a while Mr. B stopped struggling, and looked back at Kurama. I know you did. There isn't any way you could have won if you hadn't. I had you clearly into Sugi, replied B, trying to kill Kurama with his eyes. Kurama just stared right back. Is this all it is, a dispute over who won and who lost? Asked Naruto, pinching the bridge of his nose in annoyance. No, it was much more, explained B. We had the game to see who would have the last of the sake, Until you destroyed it, interrupted Kurama. You shouldn't be able to drink something that you won dishonorably, said B. Naruto, having enough of their pointless squabbles, waved his hand, and their voices all disappeared, along with their movement. Both Kurama and B looked at Naruto, unable to do anything other than listen. Naruto took a deep breath, before looking at B. Now B, I know it is in your nature, but if you need to make conflict, at least do it over something less petty than a game, reprimanded Naruto. Now go back to your sector. I'm sure C has created some abomination that needs killing. Naruto released B from his grasp. B looked at Kurama, before walking, with difficulty, toward the door. He stopped at the door, his shoulders shaking, before turning quickly and sprinting at the still immobilized Kurama. Kukri in hand. He didn't make it 3 steps though, before he warped from the room, presumably to his sector of Naruto's mind. Naruto shook his head and sighed, before looking at Kurama, who was smiling smugly. Naruto waved his hand, allowing Kurama control of his body once again. Is this what you do for fun? Asked Naruto wearily. He had come into his mind for a moment of respite from the combat that was happening outside of his body, only to have to break up a fight that would have probably messed with his senses. Well, yes, when you have been reduced from the place of power I once held in the world, to the place I am in now, you do whatever you can for a little bit of fun. Plus, it is easy to get a rise out of him, replied Kurama. Naruto snorted in laughter. That is an understatement, said Naruto. Even if you were a deaf, dumb, blind, cripple, you could still get a rise out of B just because you were drooling the wrong way, stated Naruto, chuckling. It is good that you do not use him as much as the others. He is too impulsive for my taste. He would make a poor battle commander, replied Kurama. Naruto sighed, before sitting down, a nice chair coming into existence to catch him. He waved his hand, and another one appeared in front of him. Kurama walked forward and sat in the one across from Naruto. About B, while I do agree that he isn't exactly the best commander, he is a beast on the battlefield, said Naruto. And beasts should be caged until they are needed, said Kurama in reply. Naruto snorted once more, this time at Kurama. You do know how hypocritical you sound right now, right? Said Naruto. Kurama just frowned. I may have been an animal in form, but in mind, I surpass even you, replied Kurama. B is my opposite. He is human in form, but his mindset is that of a beast. Set off at the slightest thing. He would have been more fit in my old body, but he is occupying it right now. No denying that, acknowledged Naruto, but give me 1,000 years and see how my mind is then. Naruto waved his hand, and all around him appeared miniature versions of windows in the main part of his brain. His sight was exactly like he left it, blank, but that wasn't what he was looking at. His ears told him that the riders were approximately 3 real minutes away. The window formed a representation of the ravine, using lines, making it look like a topographical map. Whenever a new sound was introduced, it was added to the map, before fading away slowly. Naruto waved his hand, and a new window appeared in front of him. This one showed the world in a multicolored haze. The ravine was represented by a lively green color. The cloud above them was a sickly yellow color. The riders coming toward him were a vibrant blue. The birds in the sky were of the same blue, as were the animals in the earth. All of these colors were the chakra of the world, each different and unique in their own way. Naruto gave a frustrated grunt as he looked at the window in front of him. Despite being in a meditative state, he still couldn't sense the titans, which annoyed him to no end. He had become accustomed to sensing things before they came at him. Being unable to sense a titan, beyond a faint chakra signature, was unsettling. He sighed before waving his hand again, and all of the windows went away. He leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes for a moment. Resting them after a minute or two, he sat up, and looked at Kurama. "So, how is the seal holding up?" asked Naruto. "I just replaced it not 3 hours ago, it's holding up fine for now at least," replied Kurama. "I see," was all Naruto said. He leaned forward and clasped his hands in front of his face, deep in thought. "He is getting stronger, soon not even C's seals will be able to contain him," stated Kurama. "I know, but we have to postpone it as long as possible," replied Naruto. "I won't say it again, but you know my standing on the situation," said Kurama. Naruto sighed. "I know, let him out before he gets too powerful to control, and you know my standing on it." Naruto sighed. "He's gaining power. I won't deny, however, it is not like I'm not doing anything. I grow more powerful with every passing day as well." Naruto stood up, as did Kurama. Naruto walked to the door and held it open, gesturing to Kurama to leave. When Kurama exited, Naruto turned around to face the room. He closed his eyes in concentration. He lifted his hand, and slowly passed it over the room. As his hand moved, the room gained color and shape, furniture started to appear, and windows. When he was finished, he stayed in the doorway looking over the room with longing, before he turned around and left it. It was a circular room with 6 great windows facing north. On either side there was a couch, and in front of the windows was a large desk of some exotic hardwood. The roof was a great red cone. In front of the desk there was a cloth hanging with the same symbol as the one on his metal headband. Behind the desk was a great, green, high-backed chair. Behind the desk, there was a crate of sake, just waiting for someone to come for it. Naruto walked out into the command room. He couldn't see Kurama, who had probably gone to another sector of his mind. He looked at the screens and, not seeing anything threatening to him in his vicinity, walked over and sat in his command chair. He looked up at the window for sound and saw that the riders, while 3 minutes real time away, were still around 20 mental minutes away. He closed his eyes, resting, as he waited for the group of riders to reach him. Naruto opened his eyes. He looked down the ravine and saw the riders about 200 meters away. He cracked his neck and rolled out his body from his short nap, wishing to conserve chakra. He leapt down from the wall, landing on a stone outcropping of wall near the exit, where he sat in clear view of the riders. When they got about 25 meters away from him, he leapt down onto the soft earth of the ravine, intending on getting a mount for himself to ride on. Hideki saw him, and around 10 meters away he raised his hand, made a signal to those behind him. The group slowed down before stopping. Hideki looked down at Naruto, his eyes showing contempt for Naruto at proving him wrong. He hated being proven wrong. "You survived," stated Hideki, his voice echoing his mood. "Oh, you say that like it is a bad thing," replied Naruto. "Your mount was lost back at the south entrance. You will have to ride in the cart for the time being," said Hideki, apparently not hearing Naruto's last statement. Naruto shrugged. He had ridden amongst the injured and dying before. It was nothing new. He started walking past Hideki, when many yells erupted, along with the frantic neighing of horses. Naruto started pushing through the crowd of riders, who could apparently see something Naruto couldn't. He had just started contemplating on jumping onto the wall, when a strong nagging sensation started itching at the back of his mind. With less than a thought, Naruto vanished from his place in the crowds of horses and people, and reappeared on the face of a titan. Naruto was grasping the knife he had given Ahiya. It was stuck in the titan's eye. This titan had come out of the ground, like the one that had eaten Naruto's clone. Naruto saw Ahiya slumped against the wall of the ravine about 8 meters away. The titan itself was in a pained frenzy, clawing at its face, trying to pull the knife from its eye. One of its hands grasped Naruto and threw him at the wall of the ravine extremely hard. Naruto flipped mid-air, and landed on the wall of the ravine, cracks spreading out from the impact. Naruto drew his Nodaichi from its sheath and rushed toward the titan. It didn't even notice him when he ran up its back. It was only until he had reached the titan's neck that it even acknowledged Naruto's existence. By then it was too late. Naruto swung his blade and decapitated the titan completely. Naruto jumped off the titan's back and landed on the ground next to the hole it had made. Naruto looked around, seeing the devastation the titan wrought. 6 men were, and their horses were dead or dying. The cart had made it out. Naruto looked until he found Ahiya, still slumped against the wall of the ravine. Naruto ran over to him. He grimaced at what he saw. Both Ahiya's legs were mangled, the left one only hanging by a few sinews of muscle, and his arm was twisted at a sickening angle, presumably by the fall the titan had thrown him away when he stabbed it in the eye. Ahiya looked up, even though one eye was caked with blood, making him unable to open it. "Hey, got me good this time, didn't it?" said Ahiya, coughing up blood. Naruto didn't say anything. Instead, kneeling down next to Ahiya, he put his hand up to Ahiya's left leg. "Shozen Jutsu, mystical healing palm technique," muttered Naruto under his breath. Ahiya's leg started to slowly mend, but the blood was pumping out faster than Naruto could heal it. Naruto grunted in frustration. He had been a fighter, not a healer. The only reason he even knew this jutsu was that he needed a backup ability if his healing factor was unable to regenerate his wound. Ahia lifted his hand and put in on Naruto's arm. Whatever you're doing, stop. I can already feel my life fading, though I know who you are. I cannot see you, and my body feels cold. He squeezed Naruto's arm, as if he was trying to hold onto him, trying to hold off death. Naruto ignored him, instead pumping more chakra into the jutsu. Naruto-san, I have one request of you, mumbled out Ahia, his voice becoming slurred. Naruto just kept up the jutsu. Beads of sweat were pouring down his forehead and into his eyes in concentration. My daughter, Channa, I am the only family she has. Her mother died from the plague, same as her brother. We lived in Trost District, 4th Sector, whispered Ahia. His eyes started to become unfocused. She had her mother's hair, beautiful stuff. Wish I could hold her once more, but we don't choose when we meet death, only how we do so. My friends, I'll be seeing you soon. Ahia let loose his final breath, and life left him. His one open eye became glossy, and his body went limp. Naruto deactivated his jutsu before reaching up to Ahia's face and closing his eye, so that his body might rest. He grasped Ahia's hand in between his own. I promise you, I will protect her. I give you my word, replied Naruto. Naruto laid Ahia's body against the wall of the ravine, making him as comfortable as he could. He then went to the 6 other men he had seen around the Titan, but they had all been struck by the Titan in its rage frenzy, and had died, be it from the hit of the Titan or being crushed by their horses. Naruto shook his head in frustration and anger, but there was nothing he could do. By the time he had checked everyone, the group was already moving, getting out of the ravine as fast as they could. Naruto climbed into the cart. As it passed by him, he looked around. There were various people with various injuries, the worst of which was a man who had his entire right arm torn off. In front of the cart, behind the driver, was a chest of wood, held down by many chains. He sat at the end of the cart, with his left leg hanging down. He took out his nodaichi and laid it across his lap. He reached into his coat, and pulled out a whetstone, and set to sharpening his blade with each pass of the stone. If you looked closely, you could see some kind of barely controlled rage that was just behind his eyes. After a while, Naruto put down his whetstone and looked into the sky. The sun was near setting. Soon it would be night. He set aside his blade and stood in the back of the cart. He looked towards the north, to their destination, the last refuge of humanity, Wall Maria. Naruto opened his eyes, his rest disturbed by a large bang. In the sky, a green tail of smoke streaked from behind a metal flare. The flare rose for about 200 meters before detonating above their heads. Naruto's eyes were distracted from the flare by another flare. Only, this one wasn't fired from the group in front of the group, perhaps a kilometer away. The Great Wall Maria rose into the sky. A flare was quickly shooting up into the sky from the top of the wall, although it wasn't the wall they were going to. Instead, it was an outcrop of the wall, a large half-circle of stone housing an entire city of people. The wall around the outcrop was teeming with people manning guns, repairing the wall, and all of them were watching for those of the Recon Corp. It had been 3 days since they had gone into the ravine that night. The strikers that had been with him came up to him, and kneeled in front of him, thanking him profusely for saving so many people of the Recon Corp. One of them had actually offered Naruto his dinner. Naruto refused the man, saying that it would be a waste to save someone, only for him to die of exhaustion the next day because he didn't eat. Despite the death of 8 people, the group was in relatively high spirits. According to Jared, the cart driver, it was the least amount of deaths he had ever seen in an expedition back to the wall. Naruto had lost his mount in the ravine, so he had been riding with Jared for the last 2 days. It was bumpy, but at least he had good company. Naruto got up from the back of the cart and climbed up next to Jared. Jared looked at Naruto before shrugging, not really minding Naruto's company. Jared was large barrel of a man. Long days of driving the cart had given him large muscular arms that he used to expertly guide the team of horses in front of him. He had a dark complexion, his skin being a dark brown. His face was usually bore a look of indifference. He had a short, unkempt beard and hair that was deep brown, nearly black. His most prominent feature was his eyes, or rather eye. He had lost his left eye when he was in the Northern Scouting Legion. One of his comrades had been messing with his flare gun when it went off and struck his left cheek. Now the left side of his face was a scarred mess of skin and bone. Jared reminded Naruto a lot of Ahia. He was a veteran of the Recon Corp. He didn't speak much, and when he did he got to the point. Naruto looked up at the outcrop attached to Wall Maria. It truly was a massive thing. Stretching high into the sky, the earth started to turn brown around the outcrop, and there was now a beaten path for the group to follow. They were now on the last stretch before reaching the wall. The flare that had been launched in front of the group was shot so that the garrison on the wall would know to open the gate even from a kilometer away. Naruto could see the great gate of Wall Maria. All the land around the outcrop of the wall, for maybe 2 kilometers, was completely desolate, only sparse patches grass here and there. Jared had told him that 100 years of Titan blood falling on the ground had made it unfertile. Any trees that may have been there had been knocked down by cannon fire many years ago. Naruto heard a large explosive noise, much larger than the flare guns. He looked at the wall and faintly saw one of the cannons smoking. It was pointing to the left side of the group. Naruto looked in that direction, and saw a single Titan heading towards Tgen. The ball that was shot by the cannon struck about 7 meters off. Another shot rang out. This one was much closer, missing by only 3 meters. Another final shot rang out, and this one struck the Titan in the torso. The ball then exploded and the Titan's torso was completely destroyed. After that the group slowed down, and when they were about 100 meters from the wall, the gate started to open. The gate was different than most Naruto had seen. Instead of being made of wood, this gate was made of stone. Several large pieces of stone that were held together by long strips of steel constituted the majority of the gate. 3 massive chains were attached to the top of the gate, connected to 3 equally massive winches at the top of the wall. The winches were spewing out steam as they lifted the gate. The gate had the Scouting Legion's Wings of Freedom emblem painted onto it. The gate wasn't lifted to its full height, instead only lifted enough to allow mounted riders through. Naruto, being on the cart, was the last through the gate, and not a moment had passed since he went through, before the gate came down behind them. They were now in a large tunnel going through the wall. Not only was Wall Maria tall, it was extremely thick, having to be at least 20 meters. The gate that guarded the entrance was only about 5 meters thick. The tunnel was lit by torches placed at even intervals along the wall. At the end of the tunnel was another gate exactly like the one at the front, so that if the Titans managed to get through the first one there would be a second one to keep them at bay. The second gate was kept up most of the time, but it could be dropped at a moment's notice. The tunnel was pretty stuffy, and with the torches there taking the oxygen, it was not exactly pleasant. About halfway through the tunnel, Naruto started to hear bells ringing. When he came out, he saw people lining the main street of a large city. Naruto hopped off the cart, wishing to stretch his legs. When he landed, his feet made a squelching sound, and when he looked down, he saw the waist of close to 55 horses. He sighed, before trudging forward, his boots serving their purpose in keeping his feet clean. He saw many people around the entrance, not really cheering, but there to watch. He looked around for a moment more, before closing his eyes and activating their true ability. He opened them, and saw the world in a new light and shade. His pupil was still red and slit, except that it had 3 ringlets around it. He looked around, trying to get a rough layout of the city. When he had his ability on, his eyes allowed him to see chakra, and buildings contained chakra. The chakra of buildings was usually a dull green, earth being green and the materials for buildings coming from the earth. It would only be natural that the buildings be a similar color. When he started to look around though, the people started to quiet down wherever his gaze was directed. He knew he had this effect, and after a moment, stopped looking at the buildings, and started looking at the people instead. Each person was a bright blue dot in a sea of other bright blue dots. Some were brighter than others, and some had chakra tinted with green or red. It was quite interesting thing to see. As he was passing a group of people, he saw a little boy, probably no older than 10, whack a man on the head, before being grabbed by another small child. The chakra of the children was brighter than the other adults around them, although they had less of it. That was quite normal, given the fact that they had rarely seen the harshness of the world. Naruto gave a small smile, thinking about the innocence of children. After that, he refocused back on the buildings. To the east he saw a large river with many boats attached to large metal pulling devices, similar to the ones on top of Shiganshina's wall. The boats went through one of 2 entrances into the main area of Wall Maria, the first being a large gated hole in the wall where the water of the river passed through, the second one being an entrance that was, more or less, an exact replica of the one he had passed to get into Shiganshina, except there was only one massive wall instead of 2, slightly less massive, walls. In the center of the city, there was a large building that looked like a huge stone fort, or a small castle, with walls 20 meters high and a central building that was 30 meters tall with a large cannon at the top of it. All the major roads in the city met at a crossroads at the large building. To the west of the building, there was a market district, and all around the city, there were residential houses. Naruto, deciding that he had walked through enough horse dung for one day, hopped up next to Jared and took one last look around the area before deactivating his eyes and going to the task of scraping the crap off his boots. Naruto and the group were on the main road, so they were obviously heading toward the large fort. By the time they had reached it, the crowds that had been watching them at the main gate of Shiganshina had all but dispersed. Naruto looked up at the large fort and was impressed. The bailey of the fort was made of solid limestone mortared together for stability. Each stone was carved so well and fit the other so easily, that they probably didn't even need the mortar to hold it together. The bailey had 4 entrances to accommodate the 4 roads that intersected there. Each entrance was guarded by a massive iron portcullis like the second gate in Shiganshina. The portcullis was always kept open, but they could be dropped at a moment's notice. When Naruto passed under the gate, he saw that walls of the bailey were about 12 meters thick. When he emerged out the other side of the walls, he saw a large yard with the cannon building in the center. The group headed toward the northwest section of the yard, where the stables were. All of the group, that is, except Jared, who instead headed toward the main building in the center of the yard. Several people were coming down from the walls and out of the building to meet Jared. They helped the injured out of the cart. Jared got up and climbed into the cart. He went to the chest and took out a large key that was attached to a chain around his neck. He leaned down and unlocked the chest. From it confines 4 men from the main building, dressed in the garb of the garrison, took the chest and lifted it off the cart. They took it into the building along with a stream of injured troops. Jared climbed back into the driver's seat and grabbed the reins and headed toward the stables. When they reached the stables, Naruto hopped off the cart and helped Jared unhitch the horses from the cart. When he finished that, he bid goodbye to Jared and started looking for Hideki. Naruto found him a few minutes later speaking to a man dressed in a long, high-collared navy blue coat. He also wore cotton pants that were a different shade of blue than his coat. His shirt was made of a fine silk material and decorated with military stripes. His boots were shin-high black leather. The man stood at equal height with Naruto, making quite an imposing figure. He had a stern-looking face and square jaw. He had shoulder-length black hair that was well kept, as well as a large mustache the same color as his hair. His eyes looked like a hawk's, a rich, deep brown, and with a quality that, when they looked at you, made you feel like a mouse in a flat field. Naruto couldn't hear what Hideki and the man were saying. He saw Hideki nod before handing the man a letter. The man opened it and looked over it for a minute while he was reading. Naruto approached them both. The man looked up from the letter and Hideki just frowned a little. The man spent a few more minutes reading the note before folding it up and sticking it inside his high-collared coat. Brown-san, you and your men are now relieved. You will be contacted in 1 month for the next expedition, said the man. Hideki saluted before saying, "Hi, Halsey-san." He limped over to his men who were still in the stables, to relay the same message to them. Halsey turned to look at Naruto with a calculating eye, before holding out his hand in greeting. "I am Southern Brigadier General Halsey." Naruto regarded the hand for a moment, before grasping it. "I am Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze," replied Naruto. "Hideki-san was just telling me of how he found you. It's quite a tale," stated Halsey. "It is," replied Naruto. "He was also telling me of your performance out in the field," said Halsey, breaking the handshake. "Oh, and how did I score?" replied Naruto, sarcasm lacing his voice. "Well, Hideki-san was saying that you were insubordinate, but Erwin here, says," Halsey patting the letter he put inside his coat, "says that you should be treated as he would, and that you speak with his voice." Naruto stiffened his back. This is unexpected, thought Naruto, not really believing that he had made that much of an impact on Erwin. He didn't take Erwin for a man to do such things on a whim, but more of a man who did things with meaning in every action. It wasn't a moment after Halsey had spoken, that he saluted and bowed toward Naruto. Naruto, startled by the show of respect, just stood in place before bowing in return. Naruto thought back to his days prior to the war. He remembered his training for Hokage and came up with the proper words. "With this power you have given me, I will serve the cause with all my heart. I will do what is best, and I will give my life for the better of the cause, for the sake of both your people and mine." Both lifted from their bow. Halsey nodded toward Naruto in approval. "My halls are open to you. If you would like, I would be honored to share my food and drink," offered Halsey. Naruto didn't even need to consider. He had no place to go and Halsey's offer was quite appealing. "I would like that much," replied Naruto. Halsey nodded, before turning toward the building in the center. He hadn't walked 3 steps before Naruto felt something he had not expected, at least not in this world. There was a large bloom of chakra that even the most novice shinobi could have felt. Accompanying the surge of chakra was a massive bolt of lightning that struck just outside of the wall. Naruto leapt up to the wall of the bailey to get a better look at what had happened. He saw steam rising from the other side of the wall, similar to the sulphurous cloud that was in the ravine. His eyes widened in surprise as he saw the largest hand he had ever seen grasp Wall Maria. Behind the hand, a great face rose. This face was mostly human, although all the skin had been removed, displaying massive muscles and tendons. 2 tendons seemingly held the jaw closed, only allowing the massive titan a little space to open its mouth. Naruto watched as the titan exhaled before shifting its body, turning slightly sideways. It took him a moment to realize where the titan was and what the titan was doing. The titan was right where the wall's entrance was located. He leapt back down into the courtyard and hugged the wall of the bailey. He didn't see it, but he could definitely hear the explosion as the Titan kicked a hole into the wall. He did well in taking cover behind the Bailey. Large pieces of stone and concrete sailed overhead. One of such pieces taking out a large chunk of the upper floor of the central building. Naruto felt another chakra bloom, and when he leapt back up to the wall of the Bailey, he saw that the large Titan was nowhere to be seen. Naruto looked toward the base of the wall where he could already see Titans coming in from the hole that the large Titan had made with its foot. He then looked toward the group of riders in the courtyard who appeared to be terrified after seeing the large Titan at the wall. He reached his hand into his sleeve and started unsealed his Nodaichi, but as he was pulling it out, things started to slow and things started to blur slightly. All sound became one low bass. "Hello there, my esteemed counterpart," spoke out a voice inside Naruto's head. Naruto gave a mental sigh. "What is it, L? This is not exactly the best time to be doing this," replied Naruto. "On the contrary, I think this is a perfect time to do this," countered L. "Do what?" snapped Naruto, annoyed. "Let me in control, of course," replied L. "Why would I do that?" asked Naruto, now getting very annoyed with himself. "Well, we both agree that I am a better battle commander," responded L. "And we can also agree that you are not exactly the most inspiring figure. These men need someone that they can follow, as much as a commander," retorted Naruto. "Halsey is doing a mighty fine job at being an inspiring figure. Just look at him," replied L. Naruto looked over at Halsey, and, while he couldn't hear him as more than a noise in a sea of other noises, he could see him in the middle of picking someone up off the ground and directing him toward his horse, all of this happening in slow motion. Naruto didn't reply, instead going into a mental silence. "So?" inquired L. "Fine," replied Naruto, closing his eyes just as time, at least as he perceived it, started to resume its normal speed. L opened his eyes. He slumped forward a little bit. Getting used to having a normal body, he looked to see that his arm was in the middle of the motion of taking out Naruto's sword. He drew it from his sleeve. Before taking the sword out of its sheath, he tested its weight, taking a few swings with it to get a feel for it, before sheathing it and looking toward the wall. "Let's see what we're up against, shall we?" said L to no one in particular. He activated his eyes. Scanning all of Shiganshina, L's eyes looked much the same as Naruto's when activated, except that they were much paler than Naruto's version. L's eyes, when activated, allowed him to see through objects. At the cost of color, when he looked at the world, he saw only varying shades of black, gray, and white. The more chakra something had, the brighter it shone. The less chakra something had, the darker it was. When L looked toward the wall, he immediately saw the Titans that were pouring into the city. All of them were clearly seen, being nearly black against the white chakra of the city and of Wall Maria. There were close to 20 Titans in the city, and more were coming in. They were gorging themselves on the people that they came across. The majority of them were heading toward the market sector of Shiganshina, where there was a high concentration of humans. A few of the Titans turned east toward the river where there were evacuation boats. He saw people from the garrison try to stop the Titans, but with them having no true combat experience, they went down pretty quickly. He looked up to the top of the wall surrounding Shiganshina to see if the garrison manning the cannons was able to do anything, only to sigh in disbelief. "Whoever designed those cannons was an idiot of the highest degree," said L, more to himself than anyone else. The cannons on the wall, while versatile, being able to shoot directly up or down from the wall, and being mounted on a track that made it possible to maneuver them to any position, were only able to point one direction, so the firepower that could possibly help in the reclamation of the city was pointed in the wrong direction and would stay pointed in the wrong direction. He looked toward the base of the wall and quickly noted the position of all the Titans, before turning around to face the courtyard full of men of the Recon Corps. He saw them all frightened, as they started to resaddle their horses. L leapt down into the yard, and made his way to Halsey, who was getting the people rallied around him so that he could make some order of the situation. L walked up next to him before tapping him on the shoulder. Halsey turned to look at L, whom he saw as Naruto, and immediately straightened before saluting. "Naruto-sama," said Halsey, standing at attention. "Halsey-san, do you suppose you could get their attention?" queried L, gesturing to the mob of men and horses representing the Recon Corps. "I don't know, I guess I could trail," Halsey tried to say before L put his hand on his shoulder. L gave him a piercing stare, before he started to pump his chakra into Halsey. "Just do it," said L. Sternly he removed his hand, before putting his hands on the pommel of his Nodaichi and holding it in front of him. With his coat, and his demeanor, L struck quite an imposing figure. Halsey turned toward the men in the courtyard. He felt like he was 20 again. He exhaled, before taking one of the largest breaths of his life. "Attention!" yelled out Halsey, all of his energy seemingly funneling into the loudest sound he had ever made in his life. All sound in the courtyard ceased as everyone focused on Halsey. Naruto-sama needs speak with you all, and you would do well to listen. Erwin-sama has given him the power of his voice, so listen now as though you were listening to Erwin-sama, said Halsey before stepping aside and gesturing to L. Thank you Halsey-san, said L nodding toward Halsey. L straightened and unzipped the front of his coat, so that his mouth could be seen. He hung his hat behind his head attached to a string looped around his neck. Come forward if you intimately know the layout of the city. Of the 50 or so people, about 15 came to the front of the group. L looked over them for a moment. Okay. Now stay if you were a striker on this mission or any previous missions you may have been on, said L. Speaking to the 15 in front of him, only 4 stayed. L looked them over before addressing them. You 4 shall be guides. Direct your squads along the quickest routes to your positions, and lead them out of tight situations. The 4 men nodded absently, a little dazed at all that was happening. Men, called out L, form 4 groups, be quick about it. In a little less than 5 minutes 4, somewhat even, groups stood in front of L and the 4 men that he had chosen. L walked up to the first man in the group of 4. He was a man in his early 20s with a round face and a squat nose. Those were the most prominent features he had. His face was one of the ones that you could forget in an instant. L grabbed the man's shoulder and looked him in the eye. You are Guide A, stated L, leaving no room for debate. You will be directing Group A to the marketing area. There should be about 13 Titans waiting there once you have exterminated them. Help the garrison with civilian evacuation. Am I clear? The man nodded, before swallowing. Naruto then walked up to the next of the 4 men. The man was a tall, lanky fellow with hard, wiry muscle. He stood even taller than L, but he was no less intimidated. L looked up at the man for a moment, before reaching up and grabbing the man's shoulder and forcibly pulling him down to eye level. You are Guide B, stated L in the exact same tone as the previous man. You and Group B shall be joining Group A in dealing with the Titans in the market area. Am I clear? The man nodded. Naruto let go of the man before walking over to the next man of the 4. This man, or rather boy, could only be 17 or 18 years old. He had the beginnings of a mustache on his upper lip, but he had the arrogant confidence of youth, and he was one of the only people here who didn't look terrified or anxious, showing either extreme courage or extreme stupidity, both of which were not exactly good qualities in a leader. Thankfully this boy wasn't leading, only directing. You are Guide C, said L, his tone still as harsh as it was with the previous 2 men. You will be guiding Group C toward the river. There are 5 Titans in that direction. You will exterminate them. When that is accomplished, help the garrison evacuate the civilians in the area. Am I clear? The young man nodded, still confident. L then walked to the final man of the 4. He 20-some, stout, and despite his age, balding, he looked more properly frightened than the previous man. L walked up to the man, who was a little shorter than he was. He leaned down so that he was eye level with the man. You are Guide D, said L, still harsh. You will be directing Group D. Your objective is to get the injured, as well as the chest, to Wall Maria, where you will then leave Jared to his own job. When that is done, you will help the garrison defend the wall from any Titans that might slip past us. Am I clear? The man gave a shaking nod. L straightened up, and turned around to face the 4 groups. He didn't say anything right away, instead putting his hands in a cross shape wordlessly. 3 Cage Bunshin appeared next to him. As I cannot command you all directly, with you being in separate groups, I have created 3 clones, 1 for each group. They will command you in my stead. As L said that, each of his clones walked up to their respective guides and stood behind them, a little offset, so that the groups could see them. Naruto then took out the flare gun that Ahia had given him and held it out in front of him. Should something go irreversibly wrong, said L, I will shoot a flare into the air if you should see it. You are to retreat immediately, head back to the fort and then take the main road back to the wall if the gates are closed, or if they are blocked. Use your 3D maneuver gear and scale the wall, all of you. Take a spare fuel tank. We don't need you reaching the wall, only to not be able to climb it due to lack of gas. L took a deep breath, before saluting the men. All of them saluted him in return, and L felt just a sliver of pride. This would be the first of, hopefully, platoons of soldiers that he would command. You know your tasks, now get going. The longer you wait, the more Titans you will have to deal with. With that said, L turned to Halsey. I need you to wait here. If something should go wrong, I will need you to direct the men, as I'm sure that they would follow you more readily than I. L turned and headed to the cart where Jared would surely be. Halsey stood there for a moment perplexed, before shaking his head. Naruto-sama, said Halsey, calling after L. L turned around. What? Asked L. If you are not going to be here, then where will you be? Queried Halsey. I will be at the wall, attempting to slow the flow of Titans into the city, replied L. How? Asked Halsey, not being able to wrap his head around the idea that a man could do this, without being killed immediately. L didn't respond, instead putting his hat on head he turned and tipped it toward Halsey. I have my ways, replied L cryptically. After he said that, L zipped up his high collar so that only his eyes could be seen. He then resumed his walk to Jared's cart. What the hell does that mean? Thought Halsey, before shrugging and hoping that Naruto didn't die. L walked up to Jared's cart where, sure enough, Jared was waiting. He was looking at the axle in between the first pair of wheels. He looked up when he saw L's shadow over him. I assume you have a task set aside for me, stated Jared. Yes, replied L, his voice slightly muffled by the collar. Well, what is it? Asked Jared. L reached inside his sleeve and pulled out a scroll. I need you to deliver that to the Southern General, replied L. Ah, you mean, yes, said L, cutting off Jared, Southern General Pixis. L watched from the top of the cannon tower as the four groups departed the fort. He looked north, toward Wall Maria, to see Group D hovering around Jared's cart like a swarm of drones around a queen bee. He turned and looked southeast where Group A and B were heading toward the market and the 13 or so Titans. He turned again and looked southwest where Group C was methodically going from house to house getting civilians to the boats at the rivers. He then turned to look at the gaping hole in the wall around Shiganshina, through which even more Titans were already pouring. L sighed, before gripping Naruto's Nodaichi. If this is going to be a common happening, I will need forge my weapon, thought L as he looked down on Naruto's Nodaichi. Well, do what you can with what is given. He shook his head, before walking to the edge of the tower, and then taking a step off. But when his foot would have met the ground, instead of tipping forward off the tower, he blurred and disappeared. He reappeared, sprinting, on a roof approximately 200 meters from the tower. He ran a few steps before blurring to another roof 200 meters away. He repeated this process 3 more times, before coming upon his first Titan. It had been one of the first Titans that didn't go to the market, instead heading toward the sea of fleeing people on the main road. It had been smashing and killing its way along the main road, not really having any discernible pattern that L could follow, and it infuriated him. This thing is completely impulsive. It's just like B, even in its annoying way of eating, thought L in annoyance. Thinking of B usually made him upset, being his polar opposite. They always got on each other's nerves, and any conversation they had usually ended in conflict. L watched as the Titan stopped to pursue someone who had gone into their house. He watched as it ripped the roof off the house, and when it was completely distracted, L struck. He stepped forward from the roof of the house he was currently on and blurred, pulling out Naruto's Nodaichi. As he did, the Titan reached into the ruin of the house, but it found that it was lacking an arm, or a leg, or a head. In fact, it had been cut into several precise pieces by L. He had first cut a cross shape in its torso, dividing its body into 4 pieces. Then he cut off the limb on each piece, leaving the Titan to collapse into 8 different pieces. When the Titan had fallen, L jumped to one of the uncollapsed walls of the house, looked inside the house to see a middle-aged man in a cotton shirt and wool pants, both of which were stained by dirt and blood. The man was looking at L in awe, having never even seen someone move at such speed. He was also looking at L in happiness, now that he had a savior. L looked down at the man, and making sure he was alive, turned and blurred away down the street, leaving the man in his destroyed house. The man, who had just been feeling elation at being saved, now felt the fear of being alone. He looked around himself at the ruin of his house before getting up and running away, heading toward the river, hoping that the boats were still there. L appeared on the rooftop of one of the taller houses. He looked down the main street toward the broken wall and saw the black shapes of 6 Titans. 3 of them were in the main street, whereas the 3 others were roaming the smaller side streets, breaking into houses as if they were rats breaking into unguarded eggs. Only 2 of them were 15-meter classes though, and both of them were among the small roads. L decided to deal with the ones on the main street, being the easiest to get to at the moment. The closest of the 3 Titans on the main street was close to 250 meters from his position, with the other 2 following at 100 meters and the other 150 meters after that. L blurred from the roof and appeared a fraction of a second later 200 meters away, and 50 meters from the first of the Titans, which was currently swiping around its ankles trying to get some of the fleeing civilians. The Titan was 9 meters tall, and had a massive pot belly that made it difficult to swipe at the civilians. It had a massive nose that looked like some type of obscure vegetable. L unsheathed Naruto's Nodaichi and sprinted head on at the Titan. The Titan looked up. Right as Naruto's Nodaichi cut through its wrist, it looked at the stump at the end of its wrist, not really comprehending the fact that it was missing a hand. It did react when L cut off its arm at the elbow, giving a loud roar pain. L flinched at the volume, his ears slightly ringing when it had finished. He had cut off the wrist and arm while making passes at the Titan, hoping to distract the Titan from the civilians. Right now he was jumping toward the Titan's exposed back, Naruto's sword held behind him, ready to hit. When he landed on the Titan's back, he sliced up and cut the Titan from left hip to right shoulder. He then moved horizontally with the blade, shearing off its head in the process, and ending with the blade held over the Titan's left shoulder. He then cut diagonally down, slicing the Titan from left shoulder to right hip. L then pulled the blade from the Titan's body, and pushing against the Titan's torso, leapt away. All of this happened in only a few seconds, and when L landed, the Titan's body fell to pieces, his push on the torso causing it to separate easily. L was breathing heavily. He looked down at the Nodaichi and grit his teeth. I told him that this sword was too heavy, damn it, thought L in frustration, it's not even his good one either. He shook his head, looking down the street toward the next Titan. This Titan was 13 meters tall, and was incredibly disfigured. Its right arm was short, only reaching the middle of its stomach, whereas its right arm was long, with its fingers nearly touching the ground. Its head was also disfigured, looking more like an ice cream cone than a head. It was currently using its long arm to dig inside an inn that had probably housed close to 40 people. L watched as it pulled out a fat old man, probably the innkeeper. It handed the fat man to its short arm, and raised him up to its mouth. L didn't wait any longer. Blurring into nothing, he appeared on a rooftop 200 meters from his position, 150 or so meters from the Titan. His sword was drawn. The Titan tilted its head back to drop the old man into its open maw, but when no screaming man came falling down its gullet, it looked to see the man on the ground writhing in pain. Its arms still wrapped around his midsection. The man was holding his right leg, having broken it in the fall. The Titan's body shivered for a moment as the pain registered. It let out a roar that was even louder than the previous Titan, and while L was far enough away that the sound didn't inflict any pain, that, combined with his growing headache from the various annoying things that had happened to him that day, led to a rapidly growing migraine. L leapt from the roof and blurred before appearing high in the air above the Titan. The Titan had stopped roaring when it saw its short arm start to regrow from the stump that L had left it. It didn't even know that L was above it until it felt the sword he was using pass through its skull. L had used the fall to his advantage, gaining enough momentum to completely slice the Titan's body in half. When he landed, he rebounded toward the fat innkeeper who was still crying out in pain. L grabbed the man by the shoulders and tossed him away. About 6 meters the man screamed out in pain again. Having broken his wrist as well as disturbing his broken leg even more, he was in so much pain that he didn't even notice that if L hadn't tossed him from his previous spot, he would have been crushed under a rapidly deteriorating, and very much dead, Titan. L had used chakra to move out of the falling Titan's way. By infusing his muscles with it, he ran to the man who was currently cursing up a storm. Oh, shut up. Be glad you're alive and deal with it. Pain is only temporary. Now stop squirming so I can set the bone, reprimanded L as he knelt next to the man. The man stopped squirming but kept whimpering in pain. L put his hand in a seal, before saying, Shozen Jutsu, mystical healing palm. L's hand became wrapped in a bluish-green chakra that he used to feel where the break in the man bone was when he found it. He grasped the leg and pulled, setting the bone. The man's eyes widened before he let out a loud scream and fainted from the pain. At least he quiet now, thought L as he ran his chakra-covered hand over the man's leg, mending it. When L finished mending the man's leg, for the most part, he reached up to the man's head with his chakra-encased hand and grasped his forehead. Not a moment later the man woke up with a jolt, sitting up and looking around wildly. You should be fine. Get to the boats if you run fast, you could probably make it. Was there anyone else in the inn? Said L, getting the man's attention. The man looked at him a moment, before shaking his head. No, rasped out the man, his voice hoarse from screaming. L nodded before standing and turning down the street to get the last Titan on the main road. He was about to jump onto one of the roofs around the street when the fat man's voice stopped him. Hey, cried out the man. L turned around to look at the man. What about my wrist? Asked the man, holding out his broken wrist. What about it? Replied L. The man gaped at him. It's broken, cried out the fat man. L shrugged and turned around. You don't need your wrist to run, do you? Said L. Leaping onto the roof, he then started sprinting roof to roof towards the final Titan in the main street. This Titan was also trying to break into a house. Tiny in comparison to other Titans, being only 6 meters tall. Its body was also quite tiny, being very lithe proportionally. This Titan was pretty human looking. It didn't have any grotesquely under proportioned bits on its body. In fact, it could pass as a giant hairless human, just without any genitalia. It was currently shoulder deep into a house. Reaching in through the doorway, even from L he could hear the screams of terror of the family inside the house. L jumped to the house behind the Titan. It didn't even notice him. Focused on the family inside the house. L looked at the Titan for a moment, before he sheathed Naruto's sword. He took out a small piece of red paper from his sleeves and looked at it for a moment. The paper was small, being only 15 centimeters long and 7 wide. It was covered in several elaborate kanji all arrayed in various spirals and lines. He shrugged, before reaching into his sleeve and pulling out a normal kunai, not his three-pronged variant. He took the slip of paper and, licking one side, started wrapping it around the hilt of the kunai. When he had it wrapped all the way, he took the side that he had licked and stuck it to the rest of the paper wrapped around the handle. L looked over the kunai quickly, making sure the note was firmly on the grip. Then he drew back his arm and threw the kunai at the titan. The kunai struck the nape of the titan's neck, burying itself all the way up to the hilt. The titan, having felt the kunai as a little prick of pain, stopped rummaging around inside the house, and looked back at L. When it saw him, it pulled its arm out of the house and stood up, but as it pulled its arm out of the house, the paper on the hilt of the kunai lit on fire and started burning down fast. By the time the titan had stood up fully, the paper had nearly burnt down to the last bit, and right as it started to lunge at L, it burnt down completely. The place where the kunai was on the titan's neck exploded out in a controlled explosion, blowing the titan's head clean from its body and making a ruin of most of its torso. L had braced himself for the shockwave from the explosion, and he didn't even react to the explosion. The house he was on shook a little, but most of the houses were built to be sturdy. The titans fell to the ground, its body already starting to deteriorate. L looked into the house and saw the white chakra outlines of 5 people, 2 adults and 3 children. They were all approaching the wreckage of a doorway at the front of the house. L leapt down onto the street and approached them, deactivating his eyes in the process. They all looked shocked and afraid. The man, presumably the father of the 3 children, huddled around his the woman's legs. He was young, probably no more than 25 years old. He was incredibly youthful, and if L didn't see the children around him, he wouldn't take the man for the father of 3 children. The woman, most assuredly the mother, looked young as well. Probably only 17 or 18. She was quite lithe and had beautiful waist-length blonde hair. "You should get to the boats at the river. If you hurry you could probably make it. The fort is still held. Head there, but hurry," said L. Despite being quite cold to most, he was a sucker for children and hated seeing them in danger. The adults nodded. Paternal instincts taking over, they ushered the children down the street. The young man looked over his shoulder. "Thank you, sir. We will always be in your debt," cried out the young man. L watched them go. He also saw that one of the children, a girl of 10 probably, kept looking back at him. L waved at her. The little girl waved back before disappearing behind the collapsed wall of one of the less sturdy buildings. L turned around and leapt to the roof of the building the family had been trapped in, the ache in his head subsiding slightly. L reactivated his eyes, once again gaining their pale color. He looked around, having killed the easy-to-get titans, and searched for the titans he had seen in the side streets. He didn't really even need to activate his eyes to see them. With them all towering over the buildings, 2 of them were 15-meter class and the other was 13 meters. There was one to L's left, a 15-meter class, and 2 to his right, the remaining 15 and 13-meter titans. The one to his left was 600 meters or so away, while the ones to his right were only 400 meters away from him. He decided to go for the ones to his right, being the bigger threat. Plus, he had also seen a man of the garrison heading toward the titan to the left, so if nothing else, the man could at least act as a distraction until L got there. He turned right and after a few steps toward the 13-meter class titan, blurred away to a rooftop 200 meters away. The titan Naruto went after the 13 titan first, it being farther into the city than the other titan. It was quite grotesque, having an enlarged forehead and lopsided mouth. Its eyes were of different size and color. Its arms were also distorted, with its forearms being much larger than its upper arm. It was currently eating 2 unfortunate people it had just caught, the leg of one still sticking out of its mouth. The other was held in its hand, screaming his head off. The titan had just finished chewing the leg, and was raising the screaming man to its lips. L sprinted toward the titan, his sword drawn, but before he got close enough to inflict any damage on the titan, it had bitten off the man's head. Blood came gushing from the severed neck, covering the titan's distorted face in a coat of red blood. The titan got a slight serene look to its face as it chewed on the man's head. As if the act of eating was euphoric, it raised the rest of the body up to its mouth, but as it was about to bite down, its hand was severed from its wrist and fell to the ground. L stood facing away from the titan on a roof of one of the undestroyed houses. He was panting. "I'm so getting my sword forged after this," thought L, turning around to face the titan. The titan just stared at its stump of a wrist before its serene face turning into a snarl as it let out an ear-splitting roar of pain. L grabbed his head and groaned. "Oh, my fucking God," cried out L, his headache coming back in full force. "Just shut up." L leapt forward, the roof cracking under the force of his jump. He smashed his feet into the titan's torso and stabbed into it. His feet sank into the titan's chest. Before the titan visibly moved back, L twisted Naruto's sword so that it was facing down. He ran down the titan's torso, slicing a meter-deep cut into the titan's torso before he exited right where the titan's genitals would be. He landed in between the legs, and holding his sword out, spun and slicing off its ankles. The Titan fell forward. Not being able to stand, L leapt back before jumping onto the Titan's back and running up to its neck. He stabbed into the Titan's neck and decapitated it. L walked off the Titan's now headless body. He took a deep breath and rubbed his temples. Now I remember why we don't do this often. This headache is a pain in the ass, thought L as he jumped up to the roof of one of the numerous buildings around. He looked at the 15-meter Titan that was about 300 meters away. It was doing something odd. Instead of pursuing humans like it should be doing, it was taking various bits of building and stacking them. When the tower of rubble tumbled, it would let out an annoyed roar and start again. L was dumbfounded until he remembered what Ahia had said. Some kinds are not as bad as others. Hell, there was one time when we met an aberrant who just kinda followed us around, but it didn't do jack. It was creepy as hell. But at least the thing didn't kill us. Ahia had said that as he was distributing bowls of porridge to the troops the day they went into the ravine. Then it dawned on L that this was an aberrant. It didn't really surprise him now that he thought about, but to have an aberrant that did this was quite surprising. But he didn't waste time or take a risk. The Titan was still a Titan. He blurred to the roof of a house 100 meters or so from the Titan. He jumped roof to roof until he was about 10 meters away from the Titan, who didn't even notice Naruto, instead trying to balance a piece of debris from the wall on top of part of a roof. L was impressed. This Titan's motor control was quite phenomenal if it was actually balancing things on top of each other, a feat difficult for even some humans. He took out a piece of paper exactly like the one he had used to blow the head off the prone Titan that had tried to eat the family. Then L took out a kunai and started to wrap the paper around it. When that was complete, he drew back his arm, and with a practiced motion, threw the kunai at the Titan's neck. Before the kunai reached its neck though, the Titan leaned down to pick up another piece of debris, and the kunai instead buried itself in the wood of a roof in the tower. The kunai burst into flames, and right when the Titan came up to add another thing to its tower, the kunai exploded, launching shrapnel and searing the skin off its face. The Titan roared in pain. It started flailing around and a stray hand knocked over its tower that made it stop. It looked at its fallen tower and let out a roar of despair. All of this confused L beyond belief. This was the most emotion he had ever seen displayed by a Titan. He didn't have too much time to think on it though, because the Titan had seen him since L was the only living thing in the immediate area. The Titan made the connection that apparently had been the cause of the explosion. Now L saw the extent of its mobility. When it started leaping over buildings at a time within seconds, the thing was upon L. The Titan was quite ape-like with arms extending all the way down to its knees and very long fingers. Its face was elongated with a forehead jutting out over its brow. It used its long arms to smash the roof where L was located. He jumped away, and the Titan followed right behind. L blurred to a roof 200 meters away and let off a loud whistle, getting the now confused Titan's attention. The Titan's head whipped toward the noise and with a loud, headache-increasing shout, headed toward L. In response, L sheathed Naruto's sword and held his hand out behind him. Blue chakra began to form into a rapidly spinning sphere in his palm. He waited until the Titan was around 15 meters away, and, when it leapt at him, arms extended outwards in hope of catching him, L jumped toward the Titan, dodging the great arms as he did. The Titan, now unable to do anything with its arms, due to L being within its guard, watched as L thrust his palm forward. The blue sphere in hand supersized as it hit the Titan's face, becoming the size of a large boulder. The sphere sheared through the Titan like a white-hot knife through butter. When L exited out the other end of the Titan, all that remained was its two very long arms and a few scraps of rapidly deteriorating skin. L took a deep breath, the smell of burnt skin and hair entering his nose. He coughed and blurred to a roof away from the battle. He sighed, slightly winded after a few moments of just keeping his eyes closed, controlling his headache. He looked toward the final Titan because he dealt with these Titans first. The other Titan was a little over a kilometer away from where he currently was. When he looked over, he saw the white chakra outline of someone flying around the Titan, most likely using 3D maneuver gear. L took a few running steps toward them, before he blurred towards, appearing 200 meters away on another roof. One more blur took him to the main road, and 3 more took him to within 100 meters of the Titan. He stopped for a moment, taking a minute to catch his breath. He saw that the man from the garrison had failed in killing it, apparently having fallen to the ground. He watched as the Titan picked up the man. Naruto was slightly surprised when he saw the man lash upward and attempt to stab the Titan, but he had struck the bone above the nose or one of the Titan's cheekbones, because when the blade hit, instead of going into muscle, it snapped. L took one last deep breath, his headache still increasing. He looked at the area around the Titan, seeing if there was anything that he could use to his advantage, or be a possible detriment. What he saw was not what he wanted. There were 2 children and an adult, although the adult appeared to be trapped under something. He couldn't really determine what at this range, and his eyes really only showed chakra. He started sprinting roof to roof when he saw the Titan approach the children. He was a sucker for children. The Titan was reaching down to grab one of the children, A boy of 10. By the looks of it, L drew Naruto's Nodaichi as the Titan was about to grab the boy. Time slowed as he pumped chakra into his muscles. The brain's a muscle. L flashed in front of the boy and sliced the hand from the Titan's wrist. He was still on metaphorical nitro, which gave him a few moments to study the Titan in front of him as the chakra drained from his system. It was quite terrifying. A smile was stretching across its face, unnaturally wide. The teeth were covered in fresh blood and bits of flesh. The body was also quite disproportionate. Although he had seen a lot of this proportion amongst the Titans he had seen in the ravine, the torso was extremely wide, with the arms and head being quite small in comparison. It had very long legs and it was actually kneeling right now. Time started to speed back up to normal and the Titan slowly started to realize that it was missing an appendage. L realized what he had just done, and gave a groan that was quickly drowned out by the Titan's pained, ear-splitting, migraine-inducing roar. For the love of, thought L, as he drew his sword back. Be silent, said L. Creatures such as you do not deserve the air you are wasting with your foul breath. L moved forward at blinding speed, pumping chakra into his system. As he did, he came onto the Titan's torso and made his X slice shoulder to hip. Then he cut off the Titan's head. He fell back, doing a flip before landing on his feet. He rushed forward, and doing a spin with his sword, sliced off the Titan's left foot. The Titan made a gurgling sound, probably attempting another scream of pain, before falling apart, literally. He turned around and saw the children, one boy and one girl, both of which were around 10. He saw the boy had fear in his eyes. L walked forward and looked upon the adult. It was a woman, most likely their mother. He couldn't really make anything of her, dirt and blood covering her face. Her legs were crushed under a log, probably a crossbeam. She had brown hair, the same color as the boys, and they shared a similar face. The little girl shared none of these qualities, making L think that she heavily took after the father, or she was adopted. L shook his head. He stopped thinking on their relationships to one another, walked up to the log and started lifting it. With great effort he looked to see the children not doing anything, slightly annoying him. Child, said L, getting the boy's attention, if you value your mother's life, you will pull her out from this log now. The children did not waste a moment, grabbing their mother and pulling her from under the log. When her feet had cleared the log, he let it drop with much relief. L walked over to the mother and knelt beside her. Shozen Jutsu, mystical healing palm, muttered out L as a code of chakra appeared over his hand. He started to run it over her deformed legs, but was interrupted by the boy. What are you doing? Queried the boy. L, not wanting to deal with the boy's questions, replied. I'm healing her now, be quiet. The boy stayed silent. L ran his hand over her leg. Ad grimaced. Her femurs were, in a word, obliterated. The bones were completely shattered in multiple places. I know medical jutsu, but this is beyond me, thought L. He did his best though, and 10 minutes or so later, he had mended her bones as well as he could. He had put the bones together to the best of his ability. She would most likely be in pain whenever she walked, but she would walk. L stood up and started walking away, the children helping the mother get up. He was about to jump to the roof when the boy's voice interrupted him. Wait, called the boy's voice. L stopped listening to what the boy had to say. What's your name? Queried the boy. L thought the question odd, but indulged the boy. My name, L was about to say, L, when he caught himself. This wasn't his body yet and it did not go by the name, L. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, and with that said, he leapt onto the roof of one of the nearer buildings, and stood there a moment just to make sure they were all right. Eren, Mikasa, we need to get to the boats quickly before they fill up. He heard the mother call out. L nodded to himself, now confident that they at least knew where to go, and with one last deep breath, he blurred away from the building. L was about to head towards the market and help out groups A and B, when he saw something peculiar crouched on top of the wall. Above the entrance was a giant primate. Except, it wasn't. The primate was proportioned like a titan, and as large as one, although it had hair all over its body except on its torso, which was bare. L decided to investigate it. Being only about a kilometer away from the wall, 3 more titans had come through the wall. Since he had started his little mission of clearing out central Shiganshina, he could deal with the lesser titans that had come through the wall after he dealt with the one that could climb over the walls. He blurred from roof to roof until he appeared at the base of the wall around Shiganshina. He looked up and still saw the ape-like titan. It was looking over the edge at Naruto. Naruto was about to start running up the walls, when the ape titan did something he did not expect. It beckoned him up. Naruto was astounded at this very human gesture. He wasted no time and started to run up the wall, sticking to it with chakra, and infusing his body with it as well, To fight the power of gravity it took him close to 3 minutes, but he made it all the way up the wall. He had adjusted his position so that he wouldn't be exactly where he had seen the Titan last. For all he knew, the Titan was waiting there to bite his head off. El climbed over the edge. He looked around for the ape Titan, and found it sitting in a lotus position, the middle of the wall, its hands resting upon its lengthy thighs. El approached it warily. Still unsure if it would attack him or not, he walked until he was directly in front of it. He sat down in a lotus position of his own at the edge of the wall. If the Titan attacked him, he would just lean back and fall off the wall. He would survive the fall. The Titan looked at him for a moment, analyzing him. There was no doubt in El's mind that this Titan had intelligence far superior to any Titan he or Naruto had encountered thus far. "I suppose, if you were normal, that you should try to kill me, no?" asked the ape Titan in a deep baritone that reverberated inside its large chest. El, taken completely by surprise, sputtered before nearly falling over the edge of the wall. "But then again, you're not normal, are you?" stated the Titan. El just sat there, still trying to comprehend the fact that there was a talking Titan. The Titan sat there expectantly before frowning. "Perhaps we don't speak the same language," said the Titan to himself. El, having finally gained some sense of normality, replied, "No, I can understand you perfectly well. It's that I never expected to find a Titan that could speak any language at all." The ape Titan then looked up and smiled. It was, albeit, a quite terrifying and distorted smile, but still a smile. "Well, you should know that you are being quite a nuisance by now. My Titans should have already reached the wall, but instead they haven't even made it to the fort yet," said the Titan. "That would be my doing, yes," replied El. He didn't know really what to make of this, but he wanted to see where this conversation would go. "While it is annoying, it is not too troublesome, and it provides us this time to talk," stated the Titan, its demented smile never leaving its face. This smile wasn't like one that would be on the face of some lunatic as he slaughtered hundreds of people. No, it was like the smile you would see on someone who knew something you didn't, and that it would most likely cause you great displeasure. "Well, that's good at least," stated El, slightly sarcastic. He had been keeping an eye on the city throughout this conversation, and the groups were all doing pretty well, with groups A and B about to eliminate the Titans in the market district. "So, if I might ask, who are you, or rather, what are you? You can't possibly be human," asked the ape Titan. El Ed, for a moment before replying. "Well, as to who I am Naruto Uzumaki of Omegacure, and as to what I am, I guess you could call me human, although I'm not wholly sure myself," replied El. "I would ask you the same. You cannot possibly be a normal Titan." "If I had a name, I forgot it many years ago. For now though, I guess I could be called Beast." "You would also be right in assuming I'm not like those down in the city, but I am still a Titan," replied Beast. "So, I assume you command the Titans in the city," stated El. "Yes," replied Beast, "and I assume that you command those 3 groups of Titan killers." "That would be correct," replied El. "They are annoying as well, but I guess that you would be the more annoying one. I can deal with that, but you are also the most powerful, and if what you had said was true, then you would be that much more devastating," said Beast, more to himself than anyone. "What?" asked El, confused. "What would you do if you could harness the power of a Titan?" asked the large Titan. It seemed almost excited. "What would I do?" thought El. If what Beast is implying is true, then that would explain the large Titan. "I don't know what I would do with it," replied El. The Beast Titan frowned, clearly expecting a better answer than that. "On the one hand, if I made it back to where I came from, it would serve a very powerful military asset. The thing is, I don't know what detriments there would be to using such a thing, and from personal experience, things that give you power usually do some pretty nasty damage to you, too, one way or another." The Beast Titan didn't smile, but didn't frown either. "And anyway, why would you offer me this? As of right now I am, for all intents and purposes, your enemy," said El. The Beast Titan smiled again, showing mean, nasty teeth. "Curiosity," it replied, "as of right now, I have only had a few exceptional ones come from this, and I have found that they had exceptional qualities, things that put them aside from others. Now I see you, someone with incredible speed, inhuman strength, and above average intelligence, along with something I have never seen in my life. I would give a lot to see what kind of Titan you would turn out to be." El was taken aback by this answer. Curiosity was a defining human nature, and this Titan was sounding quite human. Deception was also a human nature, and he did not exactly trust this Titan. "I'm sorry, Beast, but I think I will have to pass. I have enough internal monsters to deal with without adding another to the collection." Beast gave a massive sigh, before standing up to his full height of 17 meters. "Well, it's a standing offer. We will meet again, I guarantee it. If you ever change your mind, head south to the ravine, then turn east until you find a large body of water, then turn south again. You will find me if I haven't already found you," stated Beast as he stretched his arms. Now I think it's time I took over Wall Maria. He lashed forward and tried to grab Elle. The speed at which Beast did so was quite impressive, and caught Elle off guard. Beast probably would have gotten him had he not situated himself at the edge of the wall. As Elle was falling, three things happened. First was a large roar from the top of the wall, almost assuredly Beast. A few seconds after that, a large bloom of chakra happened near Wall Maria. Elle looked and saw a massive, 15-meter, titan completely covered in thick plates of bone. It was charging the gate at the bottom of Wall Maria almost as soon as the massive titan appeared. Elle, more sensed, then saw a massive horde of titans rush the wall around Shiganshina. Not a moment after Elle hit the ground, a huge wave of 15-meter class titans came spilling through the hole in the wall. Shit, thought Elle as the first of the titans came rushing towards him. He was still a tad tender after falling 50 meters. Elle moved into the main road so as to funnel the titans coming at him into a single file. There were probably 10 or 11 titans rushing at him from the hole in the wall. His hands blurred through a series of seals before finishing on a tiger seal. Fingers interlocked with the index and middle fingers held pressed together, standing straight. Kaden. Goryuka no Jutsu, fire release, great dragon fire technique, he yelled out, pumping as much chakra as he could into the technique without rupturing his chakra pathways. A large dragon made of flames so hot they could barely be seen emerged from Elle's mouth and roared down the street. The cobblestone under the dragon turned red hot from the heat, and the houses in the immediate area started to burst into flame. The first titan to meet the dragon was already burning from the superheated air in front of the dragon, and when it actually met the dragon, it was almost immediately vaporized. The dragon continued through all 11 titans in the street and partway into the destroyed tunnel under the wall, and then it exploded in a superheated ball of fire and air. When Elle looked into the tunnel, he saw the stone inside was a deep red melting mess and the entrance looked like some hellish furnace. That'll buy us some time, thought Elle, as he reached inside his sleeve and pulled out the flare gun Ahia had given him. Even through the wall, he could see the black shapes of titans, hundreds of titans rushing the wall. He pointed the flare gun into the air and pulled the trigger. There was a loud bang, before a metal shell shot into the air, black smoke trailing behind. He saw an immediate reaction from his troops. All of them, almost as one, turned and started speeding towards the fort. Elle turned and headed toward the fort as well. It only took him 3 minutes to do so, and by that time, the second wave of titans had come through the wall as well, albeit incredibly burned and moving very slowly as they regenerated. Elle leapt up to the bailey and saw groups A and B in the courtyard preparing to leave. He looked right and saw his clone leading group C from the river. They were about 5 or 6 minutes away. Naruto-sama, what's the situation at the wall? Elle looked down into the courtyard to see Halsey waving up to him. There are numerous titans coming through, more than even I can handle, replied Elle. At least without endangering all of you, added Elle to himself. There was a loud bang and Elle looked up to see 8 people manning the huge cannon atop the tower. Elle looked down at Halsey questioningly. When I saw the flare, I told a few of my boys to go up and man the canoe. Halsey was cut off by another large boom from the cannon. Make sure there are enough horses for them. We'll be leaving when Group C arrives, stated Elle. He leapt down into the courtyard to ready a horse of his own. There were no civilians in the fort, all of them most likely having already gone through either to the boats or the wall. Elle remembered the armored titan that had rushed Wall Maria. He didn't wait long enough to see what had happened. He leapt up to the cannon tower, startling the operators a bit. Elle paid them no mind and instead looked toward Wall Maria. Fuck, thought Elle, going straight through the gate that was guarding the entrance to the Wall Maria was a large, titan-sized hole. This also meant that there was a titan on the other side of the wall. Elle looked right to see Group C almost in the fort. He turned around and went to the edge of the tower and addressed the people in the courtyard. Get ready to move out. Once Group Circa gets here we'll all be leaving, called out Elle. All of the people in the courtyard snapped to attention before mounting their horses. Elle heard whistle, and saw Halsey waving to the operators to do something. The operators seemed to know what it meant, because 6 of them started to tilt the cannon all the way back until it was facing straight in the air. The other 2 men grabbed a massive cylindrical object similar to the flares shot by the Recon Corps and the garrison. They loaded it into a breech in the back of the cannon and fired. There was a massive bang before the largest flare Elle had ever seen came launching out of the barrel of the cannon. It flew for about 10 feet before flame rocketed out from the back of the flare, turning it into a rocket. Bright red smoke trailed behind it as it went through the air. Then, as it reached close to 2,000 meters above the tower, it exploded, shooting more red flares into the air that continued until about 2,200 meters above the tower, where they lost their smoke. After the last of the flares lost its smoke, Elle looked down into the courtyard where Group C propelled themselves over the wall of the bailey using their 3D maneuver gear, all of the portcullis having been closed except for the northern entrance where they would all be exiting. Elle leapt down to his horse, which was located at the front of Group A, Alongside Halsey's horse he mounted his horse and gave a mental command to his clones to dispel. He became rigid for a moment as he filtered the information his clones had given him. Group A and B had lost a total of 9 people and Group C lost 4. Halsey mounted his horse and unsheathed his sword, a long cavalry saber. "May I?" inquired Halsey, addressing L. "Go ahead," replied L, grasping the reins of his horse. "Men," called out Halsey, "forward." The whole group surged forward as one through the northern entrance to the fort. As L passed it, he saw one man manning the portcullis. He was an old codger who looked to be wearing the garb of the Recon Corps. L leaned toward Halsey. "What about him?" said L, gesturing toward the old man. "He is old and frail. His bones would probably snap if he rode a hose too long," replied Halsey. "Then he should have gone with Jared, or to the boats," stated L. "Didn't want to. Said he'd rather stay and defend the fort at any rate. He's lowering the portcullis for us. Said he'd keep the place until we returned." "Stupid," thought L. "Still, it's a better death than most." L sat there thinking for a while as they approached Wall Maria, then a thought hit him. "Halsey-san," said L. Halsey looked over. "What was the flare for?" "It alerts anyone outside of the wall to come back immediately. It also lets those at Wall Rose know that something has gone horribly wrong out here, and to be prepared to receive the boats." "I see," said L. "Shit, I forgot about Erwin," thought L, thinking about what he had done to the tunnel. "He'll get through." L felt another large bloom of chakra. He quickly activated his eyes. Having deactivated them back in the fort to save chakra, he looked through the wall in front of them, expecting to see another Titan, but instead he saw nothing. "So the armored Titan must have deactivated," hypothesized L. "That's one less thing to worry about right now." L rode in silence before time slowed. Things around him started to blur and all sounds turned into one low bass. "I think it's time I have my body back," spoke Naruto. L sighed. "But this headache is so nice," replied L sarcastically. "L," Naruto said threateningly. Okay, just hold on, geez." L closed his eyes, and felt a pull on the back of his mind, before falling back into unconsciousness. Naruto opened his eyes and was immediately bombarded with one of the worst migraines he had ever had in his life. "Oh, fuck, L, you are never getting control again. You treat my body so harshly," thought Naruto. "It seems that logic has fallen asleep. Controlling a body must have worn him out," said the voice of Kurama. "No shit, he wore my body out," replied Naruto. "Well, now you have a nice, long, pleasant ride ahead of you," stated Kurama, sarcastically. "Hee, fuck you," replied Naruto, his headache making him irritable. "No thank you, I don't swing that way," replied Kurama, still sarcastic. "Just be quiet will you," thought Naruto, not in the mood for Kurama's antics. Okay, I'll be going. Just remember that we will be speaking later, deal?" stated Kurama. "Deal," and with that said, Naruto and company rode into the hole in Wall Maria. When they emerged out on the other side, he saw that the winches to the gate were destroyed. He looked around and saw the boats on the river, slowly heading wherever they were going. Naruto looked around at the long winding fields of grass and trees and then thought about how all of this land was soon to be covered in titans. This changes everything, thought Naruto as he cantered down the road. He looked behind him at Wall Maria, which was slowly shrinking as the group moved farther away from it. Naruto's eyes widened as he saw Beast climb up the side of the wall and crouch down on the edge watching the group of riders. Naruto wasn't sure, but he thought that Beast was looking at him. "What is it?" asked Halsey, turning to look at Wall Maria. Right as he did, Beast disappeared down the other side of the wall, avoiding Halsey's view. "Hey, nothing. Halsey-san, nothing at all. The ravine was there." The terrain was scarred for kilometers in both directions by the enormous trench, which resembled a deep cut made by a knife. It was still a long way off. They could only see it because they were perched atop a hill, resting their horses on an overlooking the landscape. A long smudge of gray was visible along the horizon, but it was faint. The ravine was roughly 20 kilometers away, and Wall Maria was another 80 kilometers away. The landscape between the group of riders and the ravine was dotted with enormous titans. Right now, their goal was to have their horses cover distance rather than speed, so they were moving at about 15 kilometers per hour. Only when they were being chased would they gallop. This view of the landscape was helpful to Naruto because it gave him a general idea of where to send his clones. The area between them and the ravine was entirely level, and if the group couldn't avoid a titan, they would probably lose a good number of men. Furthermore, Naruto's lack of ability to sense the titans would not help much with forewarning, even if he were present. In order to discuss his plan to kill at least a few titans with Hideki, Naruto rode to the front of the group of riders and their horses who were resting. Although he could accomplish this on his own, Naruto would still need to obey orders from the command because he was still acting as a cell sword to Erwin. After speaking with this Southern General Pixis, he would likely rise in rank, but for the time being, he would be cautious and speak with Hideki. Naruto discovered Hideki resting his leg on a stone while surveying the landscape. Naruto said, "Hideki-san," to let Hideki know he was there with a sigh. Hideki turned to face Naruto. He felt gloomy as he looked around the area. He had a higher than normal number of titans today. Hideki answered, "Yes, Naruto-san. What is it?" Naruto emphasized the might when he said, "I might have a way to take out a few titans before we have to encounter them," because he was almost certain that he or his clones could do it, but he didn't want to make any promises he couldn't keep. Hideki, however, was taken aback. "If you have a way, please tell me," Hideki said with optimism. "Well, as you have probably guessed, I am different than everyone here," Naruto replied. Hideki, unable to control his sarcasm, answered, "Not really, other than being dressed oddly, appearing in an explosion coming out of bloody nowhere, having an accent, and being able to summon anything you want from those sleeves of yours. I'd say you were pretty normal. Anyway, one of these differences would be the ability to wield chakra, which allows me to do many otherwise impossible things. Amongst some of the things I can do, is this," Naruto remarked. Crossing his hands, 3 Naruto clones appeared out of nowhere. After Naruto muttered something under his breath, Hideki's eyes widened in shock. Many of the people who had been observing their conversations were also taken aback by the appearance of the clones. Naruto went on, "You might recognize this ability from our second meeting." His hands were by his sides. Hideki did recall the clone that had been in the bed, the one that vanished after Naruto had threatened him with a knife. These are called Kage Bunshin, shadow clones. In the normal tongue, this means shadow clones. What it basically does is creates tangible duplicates of myself, Naruto remarked. One of his clones approached Hideki and extended its hand to assist him in getting off the rock he was sitting on. Astonished and perplexed by this power, Hideki asked, "But how is this possible? You say that you use this chakra, but what is chakra?" Chakra is, to put it simply, a combination of spiritual and physical energy. Without it no one would be alive. Everything has chakra. From the air you breathe, to the earth you stand on, even the titans have chakra, but for some reason, the chakra titans have is completely disproportionate to their mass. You have much more chakra than any titan we have come upon thus far, replied Naruto with a scowl on his face. Talked about the final component. He continued, turning away from Hideki and gazing across the plains to the ravine. "This is why I say might, because as of right now, they have no more chakra than, let's say, a large rabbit, and they are very hard to detect," he said. "How many of these Kage Bunshin can you create at one time, Naruto-san?" asked Hideki. Naruto glanced in Hideki's direction. "As of right now, three very powerful, very effective Kage Bunshin," said Naruto. Hideki became clearly deflated. 3 people are just 3 people, regardless of their level of power. "Well, Naruto-san, unless these clones can pull off miracles, I don't think they'll be of much help," Hideki remarked with a dejected expression once more. "Hideki-san, while I cannot promise anything, I can almost guarantee at least a few kills, or if nothing else, a small meat shield," said Naruto. Naruto became rigid and froze in place just as Hideki opened his mouth to speak. In Naruto's mind, Kurama's voice said, "Ah, come on kid, have some more confidence. One of your clones could wipe out this battalion. 3 is just overkill." "While I would agree with you, one can never be too cautious. For all we know, the titans could actually be powerful," replied Naruto. He felt something nudging him, and he suddenly snapped back to reality. Hideki was jabbing at him with his crutch when he opened his eyes. "Man, Naruto-san, you freeze up at the weirdest times. Anyway, anything you can do will help," said Hideki. Then, with some assistance from a couple of the men, he hobbled to his horse and mounted. He cast a hopeful glance down at Naruto before turning to face his men. "Mount your horses," Hideki yelled. Hideki pivoted his horse again and bided his time until his soldiers were mounted. Naruto glanced at the clones and nodded to each of them. The clones bowed and put their hands over their hearts in a salute before turning around and running toward the ravine. Naruto observed them disappear as they went down the overlook's ridge. As far as everyone else was concerned, Naruto was the only one who could see what they were seeing. It had been confusing for Naruto to see the world from up to 3 different angles when he first acquired his dojutsu. However, it was now commonplace and offered a great way to keep an eye on himself while fighting. Running back to his horse, Naruto pushed the thoughts of what his clones were seeing to the back of his mind. He jumped up on the back of his horse. He didn't arrive too soon. The group began to advance just as he mounted. Naruto let his horse take the lead most of the time and rode mindlessly. He saw his clones encounter their first titan. While he was riding, they formed up so that each of them had enough room to attack without obstructing the others. They were determined to destroy a 9-meter tall titan. With chakra-enhanced steps, the first Naruto clone outpaced the others in their sprint, testing the titan's resistance to blunt force. The 3 Narutos were facing the titan about 6 meters from the titan. The first Naruto, who had been running ahead of the other 3, jumped into the air and struck the titan's right shoulder with his right fist. Then, after being overcharged with chakra, the shoulder exploded. The titan flinched back, not because he was hurt, but rather because of the punch's tremendous force. Other than roaring at the first Naruto, the titan did nothing when the titan attempted to follow him. Naruto too leapt up from behind the titan as if traveling at extremely high speeds. The air itself appeared to waver and haze around his raised hand exactly where the titan's left shoulder was. Naruto too brought his hand down in an arc. The titan's skin began to rip and tear long before the clone's hand touched it. It was now plainly visible that a wind-made blade was cutting through the titan's arm flesh, and in less than a second, the left arm was severed at the shoulder. As its arms regenerated, the titan roared once more and tried to bite Naruto 1 and 2. Neither the third Naruto nor the flurry of tiny blue shuriken that were hurled at it were noticed by it long before the shuriken struck. Naruto's 1 and 2 left the blast site. They were glad they did. As every shuriken struck its target and exploded into tiny, 1.5-meter diameter spheres of chakra, the titan was reduced to a few heaps of flesh on the ground when the spheres collapsed upon themselves after about 3 seconds. Naruto grinned from about a kilometer away. Kurama was correct. Killing the titans wasn't too difficult. The explosion of Naruto 3's abilities was also visible to Hideki's group. Everyone who saw how little of the titan remained gasped when they arrived at the battle site before they noticed the steam rising from the small mountain of flesh. Many of them believed it to be the carcass of a large beast. However, it turned out to be a titan with its characteristic hyper-excelled decomposition. Through the eyes of his clones, Naruto observed as they plowed away for the group, eliminating any titans they came across. They peered over the edge when they arrived at the ravine. The ravine's size astounded Naruto. It was significantly larger than the Valley of Death in his own world. Only the indigenous population had ventured into the first largest valley, which was the second largest. While Naruto 3 dispelled, his clones turned to face one another and nodded. Clones 1 and 2 then spread out to the left and right with the information from the clone overwhelming his senses. Naruto recoiled in mild pain while mounted. As Kurama had predicted, it was very easy to kill the titans. Naruto was being unduly cautious by using 3 clones when the first one could have easily defeated the first titan. Although Naruto was fairly certain that he could defeat these titans, he didn't want to give himself too much confidence. Neither Erwin nor Ahia had mentioned any of these aberrant titans to him, and by both accounts, they appeared to be more powerful than the titan his clones had met. A ruthless grin spread across Naruto's face. Naruto thought, "I can't wait, this will be fun." Kurama scowled from his position at the forefront of Naruto's thoughts. He didn't anticipate this kind of behavior from Naruto. He left his place in Naruto's mind, which resembled a round room with all of the walls covered in glass. Every conscious function of Naruto was visible behind the glass. Kurama went off to investigate what was essentially Naruto's subconscious. Wearing a traditional black kimono, Kurama appeared to be in his early 20s. At least at this moment his red hair hung down to his waist and swayed smoothly as he moved. He shared Naruto's slit eyes. Subconscious was written in vivid red letters on a door that Kurama discovered. He walked through the door and into Naruto's head. The physical representation of Naruto's mind was a maze-like underground complex with doors leading to different memories. It was a location where getting lost was easy. Having lived among these halls for many years, Kurama was familiar with them. He continued to delve deeper into Naruto's mind until he finally found a chamber that was distinct from the rest of it. Instead of glass and metal, it was composed of stone and earth. There was no roof over this room. Rather, it stretched into a pitch-black area where Naruto had not been. A huge gate with thick bronze bars stood in front of the room, turning it into a prison. However, aside from a tiny piece of paper, nothing was keeping the gate together. The word "seal" was written in black kanji on this paper. The paper's corner had deteriorated and fallen off. A tiny stream of sickly green chakra entered Naruto's remaining mental space from the gate. When Kurama realized what was going on, his scowl became a snarl. He turned away from the chamber and began to change shape, his hair forming a single, long extension that resembled a tail. His face lengthened and his back began to arch. His kimono began to change and blend with his body, turning into red fur. Kurama had changed into a fox in a matter of seconds. Then he began to run. Naruto could take Kurama to their destination if he could locate him. However, he wasn't present, and Kurama wasn't thinking about this. Kurama was forced to travel a considerable distance in order to reach his destination. After a lot of detours, Kurama finally arrived at a part of the mind that resembled a hybrid of a hospital and a scientist's lab. Given the nature of the warden, This aspect of Naruto's thinking was highly peculiar, and with good reason. There were small slots in each of the doors, giving the impression that this area belonged in an asylum. Kurama transformed back into a human, his fur turning black and tying itself into a kimono. He approached a door that was slightly open. Naruto was inside, but it wasn't Naruto. Naruto had shoulder-length, wavy hair that was definitely not spiky like Naruto's, and he was wearing a lab coat. Naruto was performing a complex mathematical computation while standing in front of a chalkboard. He would occasionally pause the lengthy mathematical problem to compose a much simpler, smaller one. After completing an equation, it would separate from the board and take flight to a different room in Naruto's mind for additional processing. Kurama approached him and gave him a quick tap on the shoulder. Kurama was working hard on potential ways to return to their own world, which is the only reason Naruto didn't notice him. He was therefore totally unprepared for the tap on his shoulder. He took out a tiny scalpel, as sharp as he could imagine, from inside his lab coat. Kurama quickly leapt away after tapping Naruto on the shoulder because he knew that Naruto would respond in this manner. The sharpest thing in the physical world is still as sharp as one can imagine. Kurama was cut. Even though the blade obviously missed him, the cut healed as soon as it was made. Kurama still felt pain from it, though, and he winced. Kurama-san, you should know not to sneak up on me. For all I know, you could have been one of the more aggressive ideas, replied Naruto. Putting down his scalpel, he swiftly turned around and wrote a very basic-looking equation on the board. Two chairs with opposite faces appeared next to the chalkboard. Taking one of the chairs, Naruto pointed to the other. Kurama sat down across from Naruto after readjusting his kimono. So Kurama-san, what did you come to see me for? Replied Naruto. Kurama leaned forward in his chair after giving him a serious look. You've been slacking off, Kurama made the statement. I don't know what you mean, Kurama-san, Naruto said with a smile, seemingly unconcerned in any way. The seal is your responsibility. It's degraded. If you put him under enough stress, he could break out, Kurama said, reclined within his chair. Naruto stopped grinning. Naruto slouched back in his chair and grumbled, why do you have me do it? Because logic would try to destroy him, bloodlust would try to combat him, sin would strike a deal with him, and the others just don't have the power to control him, stated Kurama. Naruto merely sighed before standing up and hastily writing something on the board. Kurama fell on his butt as the two chairs they were sitting on vanished. Angry, Kurama rose from the ground, straightened his kimono, and began to walk away. Oh, Kurama-san, said Naruto. Kurama turned around. Why don't you be a doll and take this to his chamber? I hope you know how to seal. Naruto turned toward the board and wrote a few final variables in the large mathematical equation he had been working on when Kurama had come in. Right when he finished, the equation peeled itself off the board. It flew over to Kurama and then started to shift and line up until, in a large flash of light, a paper seal floated down to Kurama's hand. The seal looked exactly like the one in the large chamber with the large gates, except instead of black kanji, the kanji was red. Much smaller kanji outlined the border of the paper. Kurama chuckled, before putting the seal within a space within the sleeves of his kimono, much like Naruto would do. I'll make sure it gets done. Oh, and see, look behind you, said Kurama, sprinting out of the room. C turned around and shrieked. Standing at his board was a small, deformed midget that looked just like him. The midget had been scrawling frantically. Things began to appear at random all over the lab, including furniture, fruits, and sake. When C said, no, bad mini C, don't do that, Kurama grinned. Continued to try to prevent the lab from being destroyed by the miniature version of himself. Naruto's body relaxed a little. He no longer felt the faint bloodlust that had plagued him for the previous 2 hours. The group had halted at the ravine's edge. The ravine was threatening. The ravine's stone walls were slick with water due to the chilly fall air, and a dense layer of fog covered the bottom. Naruto pondered whether there was a sizable body of water close by. He might see a marine layer later, but he hadn't seen one that morning. The group had taken a moment to rest their horses at the ravine's edge. In 10 minutes, the group had made a right turn and was now following the ravine's edge. A few titans had been encountered by Naruto's clones, and they had all been easily defeated. Still, he found it annoying that they hadn't yet come across an aberrant. One of Naruto's clones was sent into the hazy depths. In response to the original's mental command, the clone nodded. The clone stopped at the edge of the ravine. After turning toward it, he attempted to sense what was in the ravine, but his skills were not as advanced because he was only a clone of the original and his chakra reserves had diminished. Therefore, despite his best efforts, he was unable to detect much. He walked about 4 meters away from the edge, sensed nothing except a flock of birds, then turned back toward it, ran, and leapt off the edge. It could tell right away that something was wrong as he plunged into the deep fog. He was falling through a fog that smelled of sulfur and was far thicker than usual. Naruto saw a horrible scene as he emerged from the fog layer. What he mistook for a flock of birds turned out to be a sizable group of titans. These giants were weird, they were very spasmodic and walked in clumsy strides. Using chakra to strengthen his body and withstand the fall, the clone crashed to the bottom of the ravine. He smashed into the earth with the momentum he had gained. The sound caught the attention of every titan nearby, and they all turned to face him. Each of the 12 titans was twisted in a different way. One of them was a 15-meter class titan that was partially hidden by a low wall of dirt and crouched next to the canyon wall. There was a chilly smile on its face with 10 too many teeth. Its eyes were bloodshot and open, greatly out of proportion to its head despite their individual differences. The other titans all had smiles resembling the 15-meter titans. One titan was only 8 meters tall and had long, sharp nails. The Naruto clone waited for the titans to approach him by putting his body in a defensive position. The titans, however, hurried him at amazing speeds in place of their customary lumber, and one of them fell to his knees like a huge, insane, four-legged spider. The titan with the long fingernails hurled itself at the ravine's clay-like walls. As it got to the wall, its fingernails sank into the soft clay, propelling it in Naruto's direction. The 15-meter titan was the only one that did not move at a breakneck speed. It remained in the rear of the others. The titans had a significant advantage by the time Naruto's clone reacted because he was utterly unprepared for the unexpected rush. The blue orbs that the third Naruto clone had fired at their first titan were hurled at the 13 and 14-meter titans with the biggest strides, who were the first to reach him, with the clone firing the maximum of 10, one per finger. This eliminated 3 titans. The titans with long fingernails and the 9 and 10-meter titans were the next to approach him. There were 7 of the 9 and 10-meter titans that came to him. After dodging one swipe, he used wind enhanced by chakra to cut it in half, then into fourths, and finally into eighths. Behind him, the titan clumps collapsed into an untidy heap. He was dived at by the next 2 titans that encountered him. When the long-nailed titan saw the Naruto clone dodge into the air, it leapt off the wall, but he flipped over the attack. The clone pulled out 2 kunai knives. While flipping his back and sliding his hands into his sleeves, he cut a large piece off the flying titan's neck with them. Steam rising from the sliced flesh of the long-nailed titan mixed with the sulfurous cloud above them as it slammed into the opposite side of the ravine. When the titan struck the wall, the clay material that made up the ravine's side had a huge dent. The 2 titans he had escaped rushed up and dove for him again as soon as he landed, so the clone had no rest at all this time. Naruto chose to remain on the ground and rushed forward, sprinted past their dive, and instead of hitting him, they passed him. The clone spun around and launched 4 of the blue orbs of destruction at the titans. As they stood up, the blue explosions engulfed the titans in a matter of seconds. With his back to them, 4 of the 8-meter titans charged at him, but he had been ready for them. After blurring, Naruto vanished in a dust storm. When he reappeared behind the last of the running titans, he used one of his kunai to cut the tendons in its left leg. The titan attempted to face Naruto, but its body collapsed when it put its weight on its left leg. Before running at him once more, the other 3 turned to face the clone with the 2 kunai in each hand. He also ran in their direction to avoid the first of the 3 titans' hands. He leapt over the fallen titan and whirled around. In midair he whiplashed himself high above the titan's head after stabbing him in the arm with his kunai. Despite looking up, the 3 titans were unable to halt their sprint. Naruto used chakra to strengthen his body and push himself toward the ground. As his clone began to fall, he held the kunai out on either side of his body as he raced down toward the titans. As the titans began to slow down, Naruto began to spin and descended upon them in a death spiral. Naruto's clone would have appeared more like a warped tornado to the unaided eye than a human. Using chakra-enhanced air to guide himself, he plowed feet first toward the ground and eliminated 2 of the titans who had been standing close to each other. He sprayed out stone and dirt as he hit the ground, then landed in a martial arts stance. He had barely touched the ground when he began running in the direction of the group's 3rd titan. Naruto leapt toward the side of the titan that was turning away. As it turned around, he used timing and accuracy to cut with the titan's movement, and it was dead when it had completely turned to face the location of the clone just a moment before. The titan he had previously rendered incapacitated had regenerated and was rising, hurrying over. Naruto stabbed a kunai in the eye before leaping away. The beast flailed in front of itself and roared in rage at not being able to see. Then, in an attempt to gain a better view, the clone hurried to the side, but the spider-like titan had tried to devour him, so he had to sidestep. It pursued Naruto's clone with unidentified agility while sprinting forward on all 4 limbs. He made a hand seal as the clone was running and briefly vanished from view on the titan's back. He reappeared using chakra. He attached himself to the titan's back and began to move along its spine. The titan continued to spin wildly in an attempt to get to the Naruto clone. It sprinted in the direction of the ravine's wall, but the clone reached its neck just as it was ready to do so. He severed a large chunk of its nape by stabbing down into its neck. The Titan's body began to crumple as he was doing this, and the momentum caused it to skid across the ground. In the meantime, Naruto's clone landed on the strangely soft, damp earth of the ravine after performing a high back layout off the Titan's body. The clone of the Titan Naruto, who had been stabbed in the eye, rushed towards him and dove. The Titan crashed where he was standing as he turned and blurred again after reappearing on the Titan's head. He put a piece of paper that resembled the one he was thinking about on its neck and then turned away. The paper began to burn with sufficient haste. The Titan rose and chased after him. However, the clone ignored the Titan in favor of searching for the 15-meter Titan that had been in the ravine. The Titan's upper half exploded in a cloud of steam and blood about 6 meters from him. The 15-meter Titan was nowhere to be found when Naruto's clone searched the ravine for it. He attempted to sense it with chakra, but it was useless because he was a clone and his chakra was almost completely depleted. He attempted to sense the earth through vibrations and other sensations, but he received little warning before being swallowed by a mouth full of teeth. The 15-meter Titan, its gaping maw of stone and earth, exploded out of the ground. Naruto's clone spread out after being sufficiently damaged to do so. The Titan swallowed the dirt and shut its mouth after climbing out of the hole it had made. It turned to face the hole and threw the dirt back into it, hiding it. The Titan then approached the low dirt wall, crossed it, and knelt down once more. A hole leading to an intricate network of tunnels would be visible if one were to glance over the little pile of dirt. Naruto trembled on his horse as his body was affected by the agony of his clone being devoured. The battle had only taken place in the 5 minutes or so that the group had been traveling. They were trotting briskly and did not see any Titans nearby. He glanced to his left, into the ravine, where the floor was hidden by the same layer of fog his clone had traversed across the ravine. About 80 kilometers away, Wall Maria could be seen, slightly larger than it had been on the ridge. Behind the group, Ahia still rode. Naruto slowed down his horse slightly to fall back to Ahia. "Ahia-san, how is it that you survived the ravine?" asked Naruto. Ahia looked over at him. "What do you mean, Naruto?" responded Ahia. "My clone took a trip down there and, despite his powers, got eaten. I want to know how you survived," said Naruto. Ahia sighed and looked down into the fog of the ravine. "Well," started out Ahia, "when we enter the ravine, the exit is only about 400 meters away. Our best strikers would take to the air on 3D maneuver gear, while the others would ride near the edges. The only problem with that plan is the cart. It can't ride near the sides due to outcropping rocks and such, meaning it has to move in the center of the ravine. For every Titan we meet in the ravine, we usually lose 1 to 2 people guarding the cart," explained Ahia. "Why do you place so much value on this cart? The value of cripples and the injured can't possibly be worth multiple, still operable, people?" queried Naruto. Ahia nodded in understanding. "I know what you mean. Well, other than the injured, that cart carries 2 things, replied Ahia. "And what would that be?" asked Naruto. "The first would be the compiled reports of all of our outings and things that we have seen, from the amount of Titans, to the weather," stated Ahia. "It also carries the assurance that you won't be left behind." "That cart," said Ahia, gesturing toward the cart in front of them, "as one of the things that hold the Recon Corps together. It assures the men that no matter what happens to them, they will have a chance at coming home." Naruto nodded in understanding. "You still haven't told me how you make it through the ravine," chided Naruto. Ahia looked at him annoyed. "I'm getting there," responded Ahia. He sighed, the weight of years of service to humanity showing. "When I said that we lose 1 to 2 men for every Titan we meet, I wasn't exaggerating. When the strike team falls, the only way we make it by the Titans is by distracting them from the main group, primarily giving them a target to chase. Usually the Titan will forsake chasing the larger group, instead going after the target that is closest." "But," said Naruto, predicting what Ahia was going to say. Ahia turned toward him, a grim smile on his lips. "But, the Titans down there are aberrants, and even if you can get close enough to kill them, the speed at which they move makes it difficult to land a killing blow," Ahia explained. "Sounds hellish," stated Naruto. Ahia nodded wordlessly. Naruto looked toward the ravine, then to the group in general. "Well, Ahia-san, Erwin hired me to fight for him and humanity, so if protecting the group is benefiting humanity, I have no choice but to do so," said Naruto. Ahia looked over at Naruto. Shaking his head, Ahia said, "While it is nice that you wish to protect us, it would be an exercise in futility." Naruto shrugged his shoulders, seemingly unconcerned. He had no idea what he could do. After reaching into his sleeves, Naruto produced an odd knife. It looked like a kunai, except that this kunai had 2 bladed guards sticking out from either side, rather than a straight blade without a guard. The weapon's grip was also peculiar. Rather than being made of leather or cloth, It was made of a piece of paper with intricate sealwork engraved on it. Ahia regarded the weapon with suspicion and was taken aback when Naruto threw the kunai at him for a moment. He fumbled it in his hands. Being careful not to cut himself, Ahia gave Naruto a questioning glance. Ahia gave Naruto a brief glance before reaching into a pouch on his hip. Should you come to danger that is too much for you handle, stab that knife into anything, and you shall receive help, Naruto said. He produced a flare gun, which he threw to Naruto. Shoot that into the air, and help won't be far away. There is only one shot in there though, so use it wisely, warned Ahia after glancing down at the flare gun. Naruto tucked it into his sleeves. Thank you, Ahia-san, Naruto said politely. The same to you, Ahia retorted. Both remained 10 meters or so behind the group at a brisk trot instead of actually talking. They relished the silence that was granted to them, even if it was only momentarily, since neither of them knew that such a commodity would exist once they entered the ravine. It was the briefness of the silence that gave it its true value. Many fissures spread out of the ravine, clinging to the surrounding soil like tiny roots. The ravine's south entrance was located in one of these cracks. Sitting at the start of the fissure was the troop. A few minutes past the hour, Hideki had halted the group and was now yelling at the throng of riders behind him. Hideki declared, "We have arrived to the ravine," albeit loudly enough for everyone to hear. Strike teams, to the front. A few men stepped forward from the riders to sit at the front of the group on their horses. Hideki asked, "You all know what your job is, correct?" And each man at the front gave a salute before yelling. "To clear the path for the cart, and to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Hideki gave a nod. He saluted from the top of his horse, unable to get off because of his leg when he felt a tap on his left shoulder. He turned around and lifted his hand to signal to ride forward. He looked over and saw Naruto riding his own horse. Not even hearing Naruto or his mount approach, Hideki was taken aback. Hideki asked, "What is it, Naruto-san?" When Naruto said, "I think I could be of more use to you as a striker," Hideki scowled. Hideki answered, "I don't think you should. Even if you were the best fighter in the world, the science reps will want to analyze you, do experiments. Even if you were the best, I can't justifiably let you fight when you might have something that could be invaluable to humanity. One man can only do so much." Naruto gave Hideki a brief glance before turning his horse and trotting over to the strikers, relatively uniform to the other strikers. He turned his mount around again. Hideki's eyes hardened as he saw how his command was being flagrantly disregarded. "I only let you know as a courtesy. Erwin hired me as a mercenary and I intend to earn my payment. If he hears that I let you guys get slaughtered, one man can be the deciding factor between victory and defeat," stated Naruto. Despite his irritated expression, Hideki remained silent. Rather, he intended to discuss it with Erwin when he returned to the wall, though he didn't know what it meant. He knew that Naruto and Erwin had struck a deal. However, for the time being, Hideki simply turned around, raised his hand as he had before Naruto cut him off, and commanded the march. Hideki yelled. Riders of the Reacon Corps, those who remained mounted, tightened their hold on their horses' reins. "Strikers," they all said, drawing their blades and getting ready to plunge into the gully. Naruto pulled a long, Nodaichi-style blade in a simple black sheath from his sleeves. He had no obi, so he knelt down and held his sheathed sword. Forward. They charged forward as a single unit, disappearing into the ravine with the strikers' horses in a blur. Like a spider, Naruto was clinging to the ravine's walls. 3 steaming Titan corpses were lying on the ravine floor around him when the group appeared. He had just sheathed his Nodaichi and they were cantering and nearly galloping. They were already 1/3 of the way to the north entrance and had only lost 1 man so far. Despite Naruto taking the majority of the kills, the striker teams were performing well. A little while ago, he had abandoned his horse to run along the walls. Instead, he was able to kill the Titans from advantageous vantage points. Because of this, so far, he had only used the minimal amount of chakra required to enable him to run along the walls and build up his muscles sufficiently to run in front of the group. He had, however, chosen to reclaim the chakra he had used to create his third and last clone. Nearly 10 minutes had passed since they began charging, and Naruto calculated that they still had 20 or so minutes left. About 3 kilometers separated the north entrance from the south entrance. Although this distance could be covered in a reasonable amount of time, it might be challenging, particularly for the wagon, given the Titans and the rockfall from the ravine. Additionally, visibility was reduced due to the sulfurous cloud layer above them, which twisted the sun's light and filled the ravine with a sickly red, dim glow. The air in the ravine felt almost stale and musty because the cloud layer made it difficult for air to move. With the group temporarily safe, Naruto continued on in order to capture any Titans he failed to capture. The other strikers had been following him. While some would consider this to be cowardly, others would consider it astute. 4 12 and 13 meter Titans were the next group he discovered. He sprinted along the wall and then leapt toward them. Drawing his sword as he did so, he gained momentum and began to spin. The Titan's turn to face him, but Naruto's sword sliced the first one's head in two. As it did so, after landing on the ravine's floor, he ran over to the closest Titan and cut the tendons in its ankles. Naruto had just eliminated the first and last of the Titans, who had been arranged in a diamond-like shape. Two Titans stood on either side of him behind him, but he was too far away for them to swipe one of the Titans on his left. Dove for him as the others charged at him, sheathing his sword. Naruto threw it high behind him and performed multiple backhand springs to avoid the falling Titan. He completed all of this in a single motion. The Titan on his right, the one who hadn't swooped for him, spun around and charged at him. He came to a halt, grabbed his sheathed sword, pulled it out, and charged at the Titan. When Naruto got close enough, the Titan swung at him. Naruto sidestepped the blow, ran beneath the Titan, and severed its feet at the ankles. That Titan fell, making 3 Titans disabled. The Titan that dove for him had gotten up when he was doing his backhand springs. It started to sprint at him, much like the last Titan had just done. Naruto waited, not doing anything, aware that the Titan he had just temporarily crippled was crawling toward him. The sprinting Titan reached him first, but right before the Titan could take a swipe at him, he leapt into the air impossibly high. The Titan looked in the air to see Naruto, sword sheathed, pointing his index and middle at them. On the tips, 2 small, blue, marble-sized orbs were forming. It wasn't a moment later that Naruto muttered something under his breath. "Sasuyu na Hari, piercing needle." As he said this, the blue orbs exploded from his fingers, streaking toward the Titans. The first orb impacted with the only standing Titan, taking out both the standing Titan and the Titan who was crawling up behind Naruto. The second orb impacted between the Titan without a head and the Titan was without tendons. It was getting up, having just healed. The second orb expanded larger than the other, engulfing both Titans in blue chakra-induced light. Naruto, seeing that the Titans were killed, moved on down the ravine, the strikers following in the wake of his destruction. Because the ravine was, for the most part, straight, the group of Recon Corp that had been following Naruto and the strikers had been seeing this light show and were awed by his power. This also put Hideki in a sour mood, because Naruto had been right. Even if Hideki complained about insubordination, Naruto wasn't part of the military, so Erwin couldn't do anything, assuming he actually would do anything. They had only lost 1 man thus far, 2, if you counted the unlucky bastard whose horse died. Still, only 2 deaths so far was unprecedented, particularly in the ravine. They had also seen the bodies Naruto had left behind, and the majority of them were nothing more than a few lumps of skin. The group of riders had not seen a whole body since they had entered the ravine, until the strikers killed it. The group turned to watch Naruto kill another Titan, this time an 11-meter class. After seeing another flash of blue, they saw him flip the Titan over and land on its back, slicing its head in 2 with his blade after driving it into the nape of its neck. As it was falling, he leapt off its back and clung to the ravine's wall. He began sprinting along the wall before vanishing behind a rock outcrop. After a short while of running, during which the group dwindled behind him, Naruto encountered another group of Titans. 2 15-meter Titans and 1 10-meter Titan made up this group. He pulled out his Nodaichi and extended it behind him. He flipped away from the ravine's wall as he was about 20 meters from the 3 Titans, landing on the ground and continuing to run. The Titans turned and began to saunter in his direction. Like the one his clone fought in another section of the ravine, the 10-meter Titan landed on its hands and crawled at breakneck speed. The first to arrive at Naruto was the 10-meter Titan. Its jaw was dislocated, and it lunged at him with an open maw, giving the Titan the appearance of some insane bastard who was the child of a python and a spider. Naruto ran alongside the crawling Titan, dodging to the left and extending his Nodaichi to his right. The blade effortlessly tore away at the Titan's body as it struck the side of its elongated jaw, slicing through the flesh like a knife through water. Naruto's blade moved with him as he ran, and after he had passed the crawling Titan, it fell to the ravine floor, completely gutted, its stomach contents spilling onto the ground. Without recognizing the Titan Naruto had just slain, the next 2 Titans, the 15-meter Titans, continued to lumber toward him. They were both about 12 meters away from one another, with only a few feet separating them, with his middle and index fingers pointing straight up and the rest of his fingers curled. Naruto raised his left hand and made a symbol with them. He whispered, "Kage Bunshin, Shadow Clone." A clone materialized next to him, clutching a perfect duplicate of Naruto's Nodaichi. Being exact replicas of one another, they both ran up to the Titans and, when they were 6 meters away, leapt up at them with amazing force at the waist. They both cut the Titans in half at an upward angle. Both of them continued to fly through the air, continuing to fly upwards due to their momentum before grabbing each other by the wrist. The 2 Narutos extended their arms toward one another. After that, the original Naruto threw his clone back at the stunted Titans. The symbol that Naruto held at the time of his creation was held by the clone. He closed his hand as he fell between the two titans as he flew through the air. Naruto held the same symbol in his hand, and he too closed it just before he exploded. The clone closed his eyes, causing a huge fire and smoke explosion. Having employed the technique numerous times in the guerrilla tactics his village had employed at the start of his war, Naruto didn't recoil unless he needed to give the clone a lot of power. He didn't even need to say the name out loud after landing. He turned to face the cloud of smoke to make sure the two had perished. He leapt to the walls and proceeded down the ravine after a brief pause. With years of service teaching him that being far from the Titans usually meant that you weren't killed by them, Ahia rode at the rear of the group. He had witnessed Naruto's light show. To say that he wasn't impressed and awed would be an understatement, but in the Recon Corps, strange things were commonplace. Once, when he was just a new recruit in the Northern Recon Corps, he had seen a great comet that lit the sky day and night for 3 weeks. It awed him that there could be such an object in the sky, that it could rival the sun and moon in brightness. The awe he experienced back then was comparable to this one. It was striking, initially even frightening, but short-lived in any case. He was more concerned with his immediate surroundings because Titans were known to lurk among the rocks close to the cloud layer in the ravine. He noticed a steaming chunk of Titan to his right. The ravine had been littered with similar bits of flesh, some of which had even adhered to the walls. Ahia laughed. Ahia told no one in particular, "You have to give it to him, because he knows no restraint when it comes to killing." There was another explosion in front of them. Ahia smiled grimly and shook his head. "Just proves my point," he said, flicking his reins to push his horse ahead. While being in the back of the group keeps you away from the Titans in front, falling too far behind leaves alone and easy pickings for the ones in the back. Naruto sheathed his sword, having just detonated another Bunshin Daibakuha, clone great explosion. Using the same tactic against these Titans as he had against the previous pair of Titans, he was running along the sides of the walls. As he had been doing his whole time in the ravine, a shadow fell over him, and by some instinct he had gained through years as a shinobi, he dodged off the wall, allowing the Titan to fall past him. Naruto fell to the ground, but still landed on his feet. When he landed, he looked to see a Titan looking almost identical to the long-nailed Titan his clone had fought earlier. Its nails were about 2 meters long, and looked vicious. Being on both hands and feet, it was crawling along the wall very speedily, its body contorting in sickening ways, making it look very much like a lizard, unlike the other which was more cautious and reminded Naruto of a spider. It bent its neck at 180 degrees so that when it looked at Naruto, the back of its head was touching his shoulders. Naruto unsheathed his sword, before sprinting at the wall of the ravine. The Titan did something unusual and hissed at Naruto, although the hiss sounded more like a strangled gasp than a true hiss. It crawled down the wall to meet Naruto. He decided instead to shorten the trip and jumped at the Titan while it was still attached to the wall. Naruto drove his Nodaichi into the Titan's mid-back, staking it to the wall. Naruto back flipped off the Titan, who was now squirming, trying to detach itself from Naruto's sword. Naruto landed on the ground, before once more leaping toward the Titan. As he moved toward the Titan, Naruto put his hand back and a blue orb the size of a grapefruit started to form in his hand. The blue orb looked exactly like the small, marble-sized orbs that appeared on his fingertips whenever he did his Sasu Yunahari, piercing needle. Naruto grasped the orb, and as he reached the Titan's neck, he thrust forward with the orb, and started to carve a chunk out of the Titan's neck wherever the blue orb touched. The flesh would vaporize away before long. Naruto had the entire neck area completely destroyed, leaving the head to hang by a few bits of flesh. The Titan hung limp, and when Naruto pulled his sword free from the rock, the Titan falling to the ground in a lifeless heap, Naruto turned, having attached himself to the wall to retrieve his sword, and started to sprint onward. Naruto started to keep his eyes out for the exit. They had been traveling for nearly 10 minutes, so the exit had to be close. He had gone ahead of the strikers, so if he came upon the exit, he would be the first one to find it. However, he continued to run. He would eventually find it. About a minute later, he encountered another group of Titans, but this time there were just 2 of them. The closest one was about 13 meters tall, and the other was slightly taller at 14 meters. They were separated by about 15 meters, about 50 meters from Naruto. The first Titan experienced a mild spasm before turning to face Naruto with a horrifying expression. Like most Titans, the face was severely deformed. However, this Titan's eyes, which were typically frightening, were absent, and the face was stretched like rubber pulled taut. They simply vanished, as if the Titan had been built without them. Rather than being gouged out, in their place were dark pits. The Titan turned toward Naruto, and started running at him, albeit a very awkward run. Naruto didn't know how this Titan had known he was there, since all of the Titans he had encountered relied on sight and touch for the most part. Erwin had told him that Titans could sense where people were. but he not expected the Titan to sense him as well as it did. Naruto still ran along the wall, and when the Titan reached him, it stopped, and looked up at Naruto with unseeing eyes. Naruto kept on running along the wall, and the Titan followed. Naruto, losing interest in the Titan, drew his Nodaichi, and held it towards the Titan. He jumped off the wall, and dove when he was about 3 meters above the Titan. It reached out with arm and caught his downward momentum with its arm, and instead of having Naruto's blade impale its head, its arm caught the blade instead, the blade piercing all the way down to the hilt in the Titan's palm. The Titan closed its hand into a fist. Intent on crushing Naruto, he leapt away before that could happen. Leaving his sword sheathed in the Titan's flesh, Naruto landed, and slid his hands into his sleeves and pulled out 2 kunai. The other Titan, the one 15 meters away, noticed the commotion, and started walking over. It had eyes, although its legs were freakishly large, having stringy, deformed musculature. Its walk started to break into a sprint. The eyeless Titan sensed the sprinting Titan and stumbled out of the way. Naruto saw the sprinting Titan and turned to face it. He crouched on the ground and waited for it to come to him. Right when the Titan was about to come upon Naruto, he jumped into the air incredibly high. In the middle of the air, right above the Titan's head, he flipped over so that his head was facing down and the Titan's neck was right where his blades would be. The invisible air shimmered several feet away from his kunai, which were too short to even penetrate the Titan's skin. Long before the kunai touched the Titan's flesh, its skin began to open as he cut down with them. When the Titan passed Naruto, almost all of its neck was gone, and then it fell and rolled over, sprawling across the ravine floor. Despite landing safely, Naruto had to immediately dodge because the eyeless Titan was pursuing him. After sprinting to the wall and leaping onto it, Naruto sprinted up it past the Titan's reach and squatted down on it. Grasping with both hands and feet, the eyeless Titan approached the wall and gave him the same look it had given Naruto when he first tried to kill it with his sword. He briefly closed his eyes before putting his hands together and creating a seal. His ring and pinky fingers were interlocked, but his thumb, index finger, and middle finger were all pointing up. In reference to Naruto. Then he inhaled deeply before yelling. He exclaimed, "Kaden! Goryuka no Jutsu, fire release, Great Dragon Fire Technique." As a mass of hardly perceptible white fire poured out of his mouth. The fire transformed into a dragon and moved in the direction of the Titan. The dragon roared in the direction of the eyeless Titan, causing the air around it to heat up and move upward. However, the dragon's dense sulfurous layer stopped it, causing the Titan's flesh to curl up almost immediately. All of the moisture evaporated, and the skin then caught fire when Naruto touched the blackened husk of skin that the dragon had left behind after passing the Titan. It crumbled and turned to ash. The only thing left where the Titan had been was Naruto's Nodaichi, which was unaffected by the fire and had a seal on the base of the blade that was blazing brightly. In order to protect the horses, Naruto used another jutsu to apply a thick layer of earth to the ravine's stone, which was red with heat. He moved to where his sword lay in the middle of the dirt. He dug his hand into the ground until he discovered his sword's hilt. With a grimace, Naruto withdrew his hand, which was entirely blackened and charred, returning his sword to its sheath. He began to flex his charred hand's fingers. Muscle beneath the hand was exposed as flakes of foul-smelling flesh fell from it, except this muscle was looking odd, writhing in odd ways, and soon skin started to form above the muscle, and not long after his hand was completely operable again, not even looking like it had been burnt to a crisp moments before. He turned and looked down the ravine. He couldn't see any Titans or the exit, but the air was feeling a bit cleaner. He shook his head and leapt up to the wall before resuming his sprint along the ravine. Naruto could see roughly 14 Titans at the north entrance. Given that the entrance was the simplest way to enter the ravine, that made sense. However, because he had positioned himself next to the cloud layer and was quite far away from them, no one had yet to notice him because it was still the largest group of Titans he had encountered. He couldn't use any of his AoE jutsu because the ravine acted as a funnel, and would probably destroy the front half of the group of riders. Thus, he limited himself to using his sword. Naruto laughed. Naruto drew his sword and sighed, saying, "I'm starting to be like Lee. Well, if I'm going to be like him, I shouldn't half-ass it." Naruto closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and hurried over to the Titans, jumping off the wall about 60 meters above them. The ravine reverberated with Naruto's battle cry, "By the power of youth, I shall burn you with my undying will of fire." As he struck the first Titan with his sword, severing it in two, Naruto stood squarely in the middle of the Titans, and they all turned to face him. Every Titan rushed in his direction at the same time. As if under an unseen command, he leapt backward over the heads toward the ravine's exit. As the first Titans to reach him dove for him, he was able to respond to the Titans far more effectively than if he were in the middle of them, because he could see every one of them. When he landed, he was first reached by the Titans who had been on the periphery of the pack. primarily those who were too small to pass the larger titans, and they were the first to start attacking again. A 6-meter titan was the first to get to him. The titan's hand sped in Naruto's direction, trying to seize him. The hand was sliced off the wrist by Naruto's flashing Nodaichi. He leapt onto the titan's arm and ran along its length. Without waiting for it to heal, he cut the arm off. When he got to the shoulder, Naruto leapt onto the titan's head. As it reached up to try to grab him, he split the back half of the titan's head open by stabbing it in the head and sliding his sword down its scalp. When he got to the titan's neck, he removed the blade from its head, spun around, and cut off a sizable portion of the neck. The force of Naruto's leap propelled the titan to the ground. While this was going on, the other titans were not sitting around doing nothing during the battle. 3 of them, all of whom were between 8 and 10 meters tall, had run up, and one of them immediately jumped for Naruto. When he landed, he swerved to the right. Turning to face them, they appeared to be in a line ahead of Naruto. From where he was standing, they turned and began running toward him, though they were somewhat hampered by their uneven strides. Naruto swiveled his body to face them with his right shoulder. At his side, beside its sheath, he held his Nodaichi. The blade's base seal began to glow a vivid red, resembling the light emanating from the clouds overhead. His Nodaichi's blade was covered in a coat of red chakra that swirled and writhed as if it were barely contained by the light from the seal. In the direction of the line of titans, Naruto leapt forward and swung upward. When his sword hit the peak of its swing, a red line that had been trailing behind it burst forward, transforming into a crescent of fire. The first titan was cut in half from the groin to the head when the flame struck it. The second titan did not fare much better, having its flesh melted from its bones when the flame exploded in front of it after losing power on the third titan. The third one managed to survive the flaming projectile. However, Naruto, who was running behind his attack, took it out. A foot struck Naruto's torso, sending him hurtling into the ravine's wall as he turned to face the other titans. He had lost his breath from the impact with the wall and was slouched against it. When he looked up, he saw 2 titans. One was 15 meters tall, and the smaller, 12-meter titan, was running toward him, determined to devour him. While he was weak, it leapt at him, but Naruto recovered his wind and leapt out of the way as it was flying through the air with a meaty thud. The titan's face struck the wall, causing a web of cracks to form. The other titan appeared to be intoxicated as it made an awkward approach to Naruto. In fact, the titan collapsed halfway to Naruto. Apparently no longer able to walk, it began to crawl toward him. Another titan had approached and was approaching from his side, with 6 more following, so Naruto didn't have time to take in the sight. Naruto noticed that the titan that had crashed its head into the wall was also rising, and that it had stones embedded in its face that were rapidly being forced out of its skin by a healing factor just as powerful as his own. Both the titan approaching from his side and the titans pursuing it were stumbling in Naruto's direction. The slow titans were the last because all of the fast titans had arrived at Naruto first, along with those at the group's periphery, and had been slain first. Seemingly the last titan capable of running, the one that had collided with the wall, charged at him once more. Before sprinting towards the running titan, Naruto assumed a sword stance. This left the slow titans for later, or, in the event of his death, the only one the strikers would have to contend with. In order to kick Naruto again, the titan pulled back its foot in the middle of its stride. Naruto swerved sideways. The leg was now beside him, and Naruto, who never misses a chance, grabbed his sword and cut the leg off. When he got to the knee without a leg to support itself, the titan fell forward after climbing onto its back. Naruto dashed to its neck and quickly slashed into it with his sword, making a deep cut. The titan immediately began to steam. He turned to face the herd of titans, many of them with unsettling deformities, who were approaching him slowly. He descended from the titan he was on and began running in their direction after realizing the group was only a few minutes away from his position. The inebriated titan, who was attempting to rise, was the first titan he encountered. Naruto leapt onto its back after it fell again, then swung his sword and severed its head. Then he started running again in the direction of the group of titans ahead of him. The first titan Naruto came upon had arms as long as its legs and its knuckles were dragging along the ground. When Naruto came up, it tried to hit him, but its arm took too long to draw back. By the time it had its arms coming forward in an attack, he had already decapitated it. He started to run after that. The next 3 titans he took in stride, leaping from one to the next, decapitating them as he went. The next titan he met didn't last long either. He leapt up at it, and spun with his sword held out, cutting off its head. When he landed, he ran up to the next one, and cut off its feet at the ankles, its stumps spewing blood that evaporated as soon as it met the air. The titan fell forward, but Naruto was there to meet it, and by the time the body had hit the earth, the head was already rolling off somewhere. The last titan in the small group had a terrifying deformity. It had mouth that took up most of its face in a horrifying grin, which was full of teeth that were sharp and unnatural in any human mouth. Naruto sprinted up to the titan and jumped into the air, thrusting his sword at its neck, hoping to get a quick kill instead. The Titan leaned down slightly, and when Naruto had thrust his sword into its neck, it opened its mouth and chomped down on Naruto's straw hat. Naruto sliced side to side, and decapitated the Titan. He leapt off the Titan, and out of the way. Naruto reached up, and pulled off his straw hat, exposing his head to the world. The top of it had a large chunk taken out of it. He gave an annoyed mumble, before tossing it away. "That was a good hat," he complained, before reaching into sleeves and pulling out an exact duplicate of the hat. His face was once again hidden when he put it back on his head. He glanced in one direction, then the other. Down the ravine he could see the strikers and the group of riders to his right, whom Naruto had instructed to stay back in case he used an ability that put them in danger. The last Titan stood on the exit, which he could see to his left. It was a steadily sloping, rising path that vanished into the clouds above them. Pointing his index finger at the Titan, Naruto showed his lack of desire to deal with it. One of his Sasuyu Nahari, or piercing needles, was developing on the tip. As soon as it was big enough, he silently launched it, and the world was instantly reduced by one Titan. Naruto leapt onto the wall and turned away. It was still several minutes before the group arrived. After the battle, Naruto found nothing else to do but take a lotus position and begin to relax. Naruto enjoyed the peaceful stillness of concentrating on oneself, even though it was really pointless in the end. Shutting his eyes and holding his breath, Naruto plunged into his thoughts. Awakened inside his head was Naruto. His physical form was still seated on the ravine wall in the lotus position. He glanced around and saw that he was seated in the command chair in the center of his command center. All around him were the windows that represented his senses, each displaying their respective selves in their own odd ways. Naruto rose from his command chair before walking over to a door in the wall of his command center labeled Common Room. Naruto walked in immediately. Sights and smells he didn't want to see or smell again assaulted his mental senses. He waved his hand to remove all furniture, smells, and other items from the room. Then there was nothing but a white room with two people standing 2 meters apart. Kurama was one of the two, grinning similar to how Mr. C was different from Naruto. The other was also a clone of Naruto, but he was different. This Naruto had a long scar running across his face and his head was shaved. The scarred Naruto wore a combat vest with a black undershirt in place of his long coat. He was dressed in cargo-style khaki pants with lots of pockets. He had the most angry expression on his face. He gave Kurama a look. His teeth were exposed, revealing long fangs in place of his incisors. Even though his black kimono was a little rumpled and had a tear down his left sleeve, Kurama was still dressed in it. He stood erect, waves of smugness radiating from him. Kurama turned to face Naruto and said, "Welcome Naruto, B-san and I were just having a small dispute. Nothing to worry about, isn't that right, B-san?" B gave him a snarl before removing a curved kukri that looked nasty. "No, you dishonorable bastard," B yelled as he swung his kukri at Kurama. Kurama sidestepped the blow by moving to the side. Kurama reprimanded B, clearly trying to provoke him, saying, "Ooh, such language. I was just being polite and then you just go off and start cursing. Have you no shame?" Naruto entered the room and extended his hand. B and Kurama both appeared to be immobile, going stock still. Naruto asked, "So, what was it this time?" to Mr. B. "Fucker cheated. I don't know how he did it, but he did," Mr. B angrily retorted. Kurama sarcastically retorted, "Oh, is that so? Then pray tell, how can I cheat at shogi?" Instead of answering, Mr. B attempted to escape Naruto's mental grip. After giving his counterpart a quick glance, Naruto palmed his face and thought about how this could be a part of him. Mr. B eventually stopped struggling and turned back to Kurama. "I had you clearly into Sugi." B shot back, attempting to kill Kurama with his eyes. "I know you did. There isn't any way you could have won if you hadn't." Kurama simply returned the stare. Pinching the bridge of his nose in frustration, Naruto questioned, "Is this all it is? A dispute over who won and who lost?" "Of no, it was much more," B clarified. "We had the game to see who would have the last of the sake, until you destroyed it." Kurama cut off. "You shouldn't be able to drink something that you won dishonorably," replied B. When Naruto waved his hand in frustration at their meaningless arguments, their voices and movements vanished, unable to do more than listen. Kurama and B both turned to face Naruto. After inhaling deeply, Naruto turned to face B. "Now B, I know it is in your nature, but if you need to make conflict, at least do it over something less petty than a game," told Naruto. "Now go back to your sector. I'm sure C has created some abomination that needs killing." Naruto let go of B. B gave Kurama a quick glance before he stumbled toward the door, his shoulders trembling. He paused at the door, then turned and ran, kukri in hand, toward the still immobilized Kurama. However, he only managed to take 3 steps before he twisted out of the room, most likely to his mental sector. After letting out a sigh and shaking his head, Naruto turned to face Kurama, who was grinning smugly. Kurama regained control of his body when Naruto waved his hand. "Is this what you do for fun?" Naruto inquired, looking tired. For a brief break from the fighting taking place outside of his body, he had entered his mind, only to have to break up a fight that would have likely confused his senses. "Well, yes, when you have been reduced from the place of power I once held in the world, to the place I am in now, you do whatever you can for a little bit of fun. Plus, it is easy to get a rise out of him," replied Kurama, and Naruto laughed. "That is an understatement," replied Naruto. "Even if you were a deaf, dumb, blind, cripple, you could still get a rise out of B just because you were drooling the wrong way," laughed Naruto. "It is good that you do not use him as much as the others. He is too impulsive for my taste. He would make a poor battle commander," said Kurama. Naruto sighed, before sitting down, a nice chair coming into existence to catch him. Another hand materialized in front of him as he waved his own. Kurama approached and took a seat in the opposite seat from Naruto. "About B, while I do agree that he isn't exactly the best commander, he is a beast on the battlefield," said Naruto. Kurama responded, "And beasts should be caged until they are needed," to which Naruto snorted again, this time in Kurama's direction. Kurama merely scowled as Naruto asked, "You do know how hypocritical you sound right now, right? I may have been an animal in form, but in mind, I surpass even you," responded Kurama. "B is my opposite. He is human in form, but his mindset is that of a beast. Set off at the slightest thing. He would have been more fit in my old body, but he is occupying it right now." "There's no doubting that," Naruto said, "but wait 1,000 years and see how my mind is then." When Naruto waved his hand, tiny representations of windows in the main portion of his brain materialized all around him. He was staring at something else, but his sight was exactly as blank as when he left it. The riders were about 3 actual minutes away, according to what he could hear. Using lines, the window created a topographical map-like depiction of the ravine. Every time a new sound was created, it was added to the map before gradually disappearing. With a wave of his hand, Naruto brought up a new window. This one displayed a multicolored haze of the world. The cloud above them was sickly yellow. The riders approaching him were vivid blue. The birds in the sky were the same shade of blue as the earthly animals, and the ravine itself was a vibrant green. The world's chakra was represented by each of these hues, each distinct and special in its own right. Gazing at the window before him, Naruto grunted in frustration. It greatly irritated him that even in his meditative state, he was unable to sense the titans. He was used to feeling things before they reached him. It was unnerving to be unable to detect a titan other than a subtle chakra signature. With a sigh, he waved his hand once more, and the windows disappeared. He reclined in his chair and briefly rested his eyes by closing them. He sat up and glanced at Kurama after a minute or two. Naruto said, "So how is the seal holding up?" "I just replaced it not 3 hours ago. It's holding up fine for now at least," said Kurama. Naruto merely said, "I see," as he leaned forward and put his hands in front of his face, lost in contemplation. "He is getting stronger. Soon not even C's seals will be able to contain him," Kurama said. Naruto answered, "I know, but we have to postpone it as long as possible." "I won't say it again, but you know my standing on the situation," Kurama replied. Naruto let out a sigh. "I know. Let him out before he gets too powerful to control, and you know my standing on it," said Naruto. "He's gaining power. I won't deny, however, it is not like I'm not doing anything. I grow more powerful with every passing day as well." Kurama and Naruto both got to their feet as he approached the door. Naruto held it open and motioned for Kurama to go. Naruto turned to face the room. As Kurama left, he focused by closing his eyes. He raised his hand and moved it slowly across the space. The room took on color and shape as his hand moved. Windows and furniture began to emerge. After finishing, he lingered in the doorway, gazing longingly around the room before turning to leave. It was a circular room with 6 large windows that faced north. A large desk made of exotic hardwood was in front of the windows, and there were couches on either side. It had a huge red cone for a roof. The same symbol that was on his metal headband was displayed on a cloth that was hanging in front of the desk. There was a large, high-backed, green chair behind the desk. A crate of sake was waiting for someone to come get it behind the desk. Naruto entered the command center. He was unable to see Kurama, who had most likely moved to a different part of his brain. After glancing at the screens, he decided to sit in his command chair since he could see nothing that threatened him nearby. The riders were 3 minutes away in real time, but they were still about 20 minutes away in his mind. When he looked up at the window for sound, he waited for the group of riders to approach him, resting with his eyes closed. When Naruto opened his eyes, he saw the riders about 200 meters away. As he peered down the ravine after a brief nap, He rolled out his body and cracked his neck. He leapt from the wall, landing on a stone outcropping close to the exit, where he sat in plain sight of the riders, in an attempt to preserve chakra. About 25 meters from him, he jumped down onto the soft ground of the ravine with the intention of obtaining a mount to ride. When Hideki noticed him, he signaled to those behind him by raising his hand. From a distance of about 10 meters the group slowed, then came to a halt. Hideki detested being proven wrong, and his eyes betrayed his disdain for Naruto for proving him wrong. "You survived," Hideki said, his tone reflecting his feelings. Naruto retorted, "Oh, you say that like it is a bad thing. Your mount was lost back at the south entrance. You will have to ride in the cart for the time being," Hideki said, seemingly unaware of what Naruto had just said. Naruto gave a shrug. It was nothing new for him to ride among the wounded and dying. As he began to pass Hideki, a lot of yelling and the frantic neighing of horses broke out. Naruto started pushing through the crowd of riders, who could apparently see something Naruto couldn't. He had just begun to consider jumping off the wall when a powerful nagging feeling began to itch at the back of his mind. Naruto disappeared from his position amidst the throngs of horses and humans with a single thought, only to reappear on a Titan's face. Naruto was holding the knife that he had given Ahiya. The Titan's eye was stuck with it. Like the Titan that devoured Naruto's clone, this one had emerged from the earth about 8 meters away. Naruto noticed Ahiya sagging against the ravine's wall. The Titan itself was in a state of excruciating pain. Attempting to remove the knife from its eye by clawing at its face, Naruto was grabbed by one of its hands and hurled violently against the ravine wall. After flipping in midair, Naruto landed on the ravine's wall, causing cracks to appear where he hit it. After removing his Nodaichi from its sheath, Naruto charged at the Titan. When he ran up its back, it didn't even notice him. The Titan didn't even acknowledge Naruto's presence until he had made it to his neck. It was too late by then. With a single swing of his blade, Naruto completely severed the Titan's head. Naruto landed on the ground beside the hole the Titan had created. After leaping off its back, Naruto surveyed the destruction the Titan had caused. There were 6 men, and their horses were either dying or dead. The cart had survived. Naruto searched until he discovered Ahiya still leaning against the ravine's wall. Naruto rushed toward him. What he saw made him grimace. Ahiya's arm was twisted at a sickening angle, likely from the fall, and both of his legs were mangled, with the left one only clinging to a few muscle sinews. He had stabbed it in the eye, and the Titan had flung him away. Even though he couldn't open one eye due to blood on it, Ahiya looked up. Coughing up blood, Ahiya remarked, "Hey, got me good this time, didn't it?" However, Naruto remained silent and knelt beside Ahiya. He touched Ahiya's left leg with his hand. Naruto whispered, "Shozen Jutsu, mystical healing palm technique," to himself. Although Ahiya's leg was beginning to heal gradually, Naruto was unable to stop the blood from leaking out of it. Naruto gave a frustrated grunt. He had not been a healer, but a fighter. The only reason he even knew this jutsu was that he needed a backup ability if his healing factor was unable to regenerate his wound. Lifting his hand, Ahiya placed it on Naruto's arm. In an attempt to cling to Naruto and prevent his death, he squeezed his arm and said, "Whatever you're doing, stop. I can already feel my life fading. Though I know who you are, I cannot see you, and my body feels cold." Ignoring him, Naruto continued to feed the jutsu more chakra. "Naruto-san, I have one request of you," Ahiya muttered. His voice growing. Slurred sweat was streaming down Naruto's forehead and into his eyes as he focused on maintaining his jutsu. With his eye beginning to blur, Ahiya whispered, "My daughter Channa, I am the only family she has. Her mother died from the plague. Just like her brother, we lived in Trost District, 4th Sector. She had her mother's hair, beautiful stuff. Wish I could hold her once more, but we don't choose when we meet death, only how we do so. My friends, I'll be seeing you soon," Ahiya said. Letting go of his last breath, his body went limp, and his one open eye turned glossy. Naruto deactivated his jutsu before reaching up to Ahiya's face and closing his eye, so that his body might rest. He grasped Ahiya's hand in between his own. "I promise you, I will protect her. I give you my word," replied Naruto. Naruto laid Ahiya's body against the wall of the ravine, making him as comfortable as he could. He then went to the 6 other men he had seen around the Titan, but they had all been struck by the Titan in its rage frenzy, and had died, be it from the hit of the Titan or being crushed by their horses. Naruto shook his head in frustration and anger, but there was nothing he could do. By the time he had checked everyone, the group was already moving, getting out of the ravine as fast as they could. Naruto climbed into the cart. As it passed by him, he looked around. There were various people with various injuries, the worst of which was a man who had his entire right arm torn off. In front of the cart, behind the driver, was a chest of wood, held down by many chains. His left leg was dangling down as he sat at the end of the cart. He pulled out his Nodaichi and placed it on his lap. He took out a whetstone from inside his coat and began sharpening his blade. If you looked closely, you could see a barely contained anger behind his eyes that increased with each stone pass. After a while Naruto put down his whetstone and looked into the sky. The sun was near setting, soon it would be night. He set aside his blade and stood in the back of the cart. He looked towards the north, to their destination, the last refuge of humanity, Wall Maria. Naruto opened his eyes, his rest disturbed by a large bang. In the sky, a green tail of smoke streaked from behind a metal flare. The flare rose for about 200 meters before detonating above their heads. Naruto's eyes were distracted from the flare by another flare. Only, this one wasn't fired from the group in front of the group, perhaps a kilometer away. The Great Wall Maria rose into the sky. A flare was quickly shooting up into the sky from the top of the wall, although it wasn't the wall they were going to. Instead, it was an outcrop of the wall, a large half-circle of stone housing an entire city of people. The wall around the outcrop was teeming with people manning guns, repairing the wall, and all of them were watching for those of the Recon Corps. It had been 3 days since they had gone into the ravine. The strikers who had accompanied him that evening approached him and knelt before him, expressing their sincere gratitude for saving so many Recon Corps members. In fact, one of them had offered Naruto dinner, declaring that it would be a waste to save someone, only for him to die of exhaustion the next day because he didn't eat. Naruto turned down the man. The group was comparatively upbeat despite the deaths of 8 members. The cart driver, Jared, said it was the fewest deaths he had ever witnessed on a return trip to the wall for the past 2 days. Naruto has been riding with Jared after losing his mount in the ravine. Even though it was difficult, he had nice company. Naruto climbed up beside Jared after getting out of the back of the cart. After giving Naruto a quick glance, Jared shrugged, not particularly enjoying Naruto's company. Jared was a big, burly man. He skillfully led the group of horses in front of him with the help of his big, muscular arms, which he had developed from driving the cart for many hours. His skin was dark brown and he had a dark complexion. His expression was typically one of indifference. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and his beard was short and disheveled. His eyes, or rather eye, were his most noticeable feature. He was in the Northern Scouting Legion when he lost his left eye when his flare gun went off and hit his left cheek. One of his teammates was tinkering with it. His face was now a scarred jumble of bone and skin on the left side. Naruto was reminded of Ahia by Jared. He served in the Recon Corps and was a quiet man who got right to the point when he spoke. Naruto glanced up at the ledge that was affixed to the wall Maria. It really was enormous. Reaching far into the sky, the group could now follow a beaten path as the ground surrounding the outcrop began to turn brown. Now they were nearing the final section before the wall to let the garrison on the wall know to open the gate. The flare that had been thrown in front of the group was shot. Naruto could see the great gate of Wall Maria even from a kilometer away. For perhaps 2 kilometers, the entire area surrounding the wall's outcrop was utterly barren. There are only sporadic patches of grass. Jared had informed him that the ground was infertile due to 100 years of Titan blood spilling on it. Any trees that might have existed had long since been destroyed by cannon fire. A loud explosion, far bigger than the flare guns, was heard by Naruto. He glanced at the wall and caught a glimpse of one of the cannons smoking. It was pointing to the group's left side. Naruto noticed a lone Titan moving toward T-Gen as he looked in that direction. The ball that the cannon fired struck roughly 7 meters away. A second shot went off, much closer this time, missing by only 3 meters. The Titan was hit in the torso by another last shot that rang out. The Titan's torso was then totally destroyed when the ball exploded. The group then slowed down, and the gate began to open when they were within 100 meters of the wall. The gate was made of stone rather than wood, which was different from what most Naruto had seen. The majority of the gate was made up of several large pieces of stone that were connected by lengthy steel strips. 3 enormous winches at the top of the wall were connected to 3 even larger chains that were fastened to the top of the gate. As they raised the gate, the winches were releasing steam. The Wings of Freedom emblem of the Scouting Legions was painted on the gate. The gate was raised just enough to let mounted riders pass through, not to its full height as he was on the cart. Naruto was the last to enter the gate, and the gate closed behind them as soon as he was through. They had now entered a spacious tunnel that ran through the wall. In addition to being tall, Wall Maria had to be at least 20 meters thick. The entrance was guarded by a gate that was only 5 meters thick. Torches were positioned evenly along the wall to illuminate the tunnel in order to keep the Titans at bay in the event that they were able to pass through the first gate. There was another gate at the end of the tunnel that was identical to the one at the front. The second gate could be dropped at any time, but it was usually kept up. The tunnel was rather stuffy, and it wasn't particularly pleasant because the torches there were consuming the oxygen. Naruto began to hear bells ringing around halfway through the tunnel. He emerged to find a large city's main street lined with people hoping to get some fresh air. Naruto leapt from the cart, his feet squelched as he landed, and he saw the waist of nearly 55 horses. When he looked down after letting out a sigh, he walked slowly forward, His boots keeping his feet clean. He noticed a lot of people watching from the entrance, but they weren't actually cheering. He took another look around before closing his eyes and using their actual power. When he opened them, the world appeared in a different hue. His pupil had 3 ringlets around it, but it was still slit and red. He scanned the area, attempting to get a general idea of the city's layout. Buildings contain chakra, which he could see with his eyes when he had his ability on. Since the earth is green and the building materials come from it, it makes sense that the buildings would have a similar color. Typically, the chakra of buildings was a dull green.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.